61. Slap Voldemort in the face in public. After the start of term feast, everyone drifted back to their secret base, the abandoned classroom. Those who had gone home for the holidays recounted their breaks. Harry was especially grateful to Hermione for the Christmas present she'd given her, Muggle contact lenses. Ron, Neville, and Jerry stared, stunned. Harry, beaming, spread her hands and produced a small red case. "These are the contact lenses Hermione gave me. You can't see the glasses when you wear them. Isn't that amazing?" "This is glasses?" Jerry reached out and poked the case. Harry gave him a look that could cause a headache. "That's a contact lens case," Ron blinked. "Impossible. Contact lens case, but I can clearly see it." Hermione, Ted, and Harry exchanged blank looks. After that, Ron and Jerry took turns moaning about their holidays. "If Ted ever stays at Hogwarts again when I could be home," Ron complained, "I'll wander the streets first." "What kind of holiday is this? Even prisoners in Azkaban aren't this exhausted," Jerry agreed from the side. "Snape plus Professor McGonagall squared, still not as tough as Ted." Ted rolled his eyes. "See? You've learned addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, all courtesy of my tutoring classes." "Yeah," Ron sighed. "Every day I crash onto my pillow and I'm out before my head hits it." Jerry nodded. "A couple of times I nearly fell asleep on the way back to the common room. Ice skating's fun, but it wears you out." "Ice skating?" Hermione said in surprise. "You learned to ice skate?" Harry frowned. "Ice skating. What's ice skating?" They all stared at each other for a beat. Was a holiday enough to build such a thick barrier between them? Harry didn't even know what contact lenses were, and Ron and Jerry thought glasses and contact lens cases were the same thing, and Hermione didn't yet understand ice skating. Once she learned what ice skating was, Harry could hardly contain herself. She bounced in her seat, eager to try it. "You'll see, I'll get the hang of it quickly. I can already picture myself gliding fast across the ice." Hermione tried to be sensible. "Not tonight, it's already dark. Tomorrow, promise?" Harry exhaled. "Tomorrow, you promised. No backing out. Like Ted said, tomorrow and tomorrow. How many tomorrows are there? Always putting things off until tomorrow, and this life will be wasted." Ted protested. "Don't misuse my poetry. I said that to make you buckle down and study." "Oh," Ron suddenly brightened. "We found something good over the holidays." He winked at Ted and Jerry. Hearing Ron say that, they all knew what he meant. Ted nodded, Jerry blinked, and the six of them slipped out before curfew to the room where the mirror of Erised had been. Ted had been worried the mirror would feed obsession and waste time, which was why he'd organized so many holiday tutoring sessions. Now they were just wasting time together as a group. The mirror was practically a charm against little wizards. None of them could resist. The Weasley twins didn't come much. They had more practical expectations and still clung to slim chances to make things real. The rest, Ron, Jerry, Harry, Neville, sat in a row, staring without blinking. Hermione fared slightly better. She saw herself excelling in every subject, already head girl with head boy Ted at her side. Harry and Neville, however, had low resistance to the mirror's pull. What they saw were the parents they had lost, bravely alive again. Ted, watching, felt helpless to counsel or stop them. He didn't have to. He sensed a faint, gentle magic settle over the room when Neville and Harry arrived. Someone would look after them. Someone would pull them back to reality and make them brave. Abandon illusions. Prepare for the fight. Dumbledore knew that drill well. After the new term began, days were for ice skating and play, nights for sneaking to the mirror. It must be said, Harry wasn't bragging. On her first attempt at skates, she teetered, but stayed upright, and soon managed to skate awkwardly but steadily. She was, in a joking way, 8 Diagon alleys, ahead of Ron and the others. She didn't care for Quidditch, but athletic talent was written through her, apparently. By the third night, several Gryffindors caught sneaking into the abandoned classroom to stare into the mirror were discovered by Dumbledore. He didn't take points from them. As a revered elder, he lectured them instead. He warned them about the false satisfaction the mirror offered, how many had wasted their lives before it, and some had even been driven mad. He urged them to be brave, to face real life, and create real happiness. Then he said he would take the mirror away and put it where it belonged. At breakfast the next day, Harry excitedly told Ted and Hermione, who hadn't gone the previous night, what had happened. She also relayed Dumbledore's answer to what he saw in the mirror. He said he saw a pile of wool socks. People always give him books, he said, but what he really wants is someone to give him a few pairs of socks. Ted smirked. Socks, huh? Next Christmas I'll send Dumbledore a pair of black stockings, signed by Snape. After the holiday buzz faded, it took most of them a few days to properly get back into school mode. Hermione hadn't needed that reset. She'd studied over the holidays and was practically always in school mode. So during their group homework sessions in the library, she regularly overachieved. If a professor assigned 5 lines, she'd write 8. Harry, Ron, and the others appreciated Hermione's industriousness. When copying homework, they could each change a few words to lower the plagiarism rate. Ted urged her to relax sometimes. She pushed herself relentlessly, activating what he teasingly called her arcane wisdom and turning every task into a competition. You need to take it easy. I found a magazine you might like. It's a bit slapstick, The Quibbler. It'll give you a laugh. Hermione stared at the copy he handed her. The pages widened her eyes. What is all this? She read for a few minutes until her eye sockets hurt. This is ridiculous. She tried to describe it but kept falling short. The Quibbler's articles were so broad and bizarre that they could be fabrication, imagination, or wildly misreported facts. There was no reliable evidence supporting them. Look at this, Hermione said, flustered. It claims that if white essence is heated with moonlight-purified water and then drunk under the moon, you can see the scene of the next full moon. That's completely made up. I've never heard of Dittany or moonlight-purified water doing anything like that. Ted chuckled. He'd partly succeeded in distracting Hermione from her self-imposed pressure, and it was amusing to watch the indignant Miss Beaver get riled. Don't be angry, Hermione. Think about it like this. The editor can tell a story. The rituals, the general principles, the precautions, possible anomalies. It's all described vividly, as if it's real. And that crumple-horned snorkack? Maybe there are undiscovered creatures from other regions. Hermione was not placated. No, if something isn't proven, you can't present it as fact, and it shouldn't be printed in a magazine as if it were true. All right, you're right, Ted said, trying not to laugh. Okay then, let me tell you some Muggle theories. Some of them are more interesting than the editor's fantasies. For instance, here's a terrifying hypothesis. What if there's a chronic poisonous gas in the air that takes 70 to 120 years to kill someone? After all, very few people live to be 200. Hermione's face went beet red. She looked like her brain was about to smoke with indignation. Neville and Harry mulled it over, but Ron and Jerry had already started holding their breath on purpose to prove nothing would happen. One morning, a heavy snow fell over the castle. Mountains, forests, and the lake were blanketed in white. The ancient building perched on the cliff looked like a silent old man. If not for the boisterous students, how lonely it would be. The kids were exuberant. They built snowmen, then had snowball fights, then applied magic. After half a year of lessons, many had learned a few minor hexes. Learning spells sometimes provoked the urge to use them. Ted, older and more restrained, refused to tumble in the snow or hex snowmen. He watched the others from the covered bridge, a small smile on his face. How good it was to be young, he sighed. Then he saw Professor Quirrell trudge past, wrapped in his purple turban and bundled up like a ball, shivering and afraid of the cold. The system pinged excitedly. Ding. Task triggered. It's just Lord Voldemort. This disgraced Dark Lord has fallen into such a state, yet still dares to cause trouble at Hogwarts. Show him some color. Confront him. Target. Hit Lord Voldemort in the face with a snowball in broad daylight. Reward. 300 experience. Card. Dragon fireworks. Lord Voldemort? Hit Lord Voldemort. Thanks to reader Wu-Wunai Chuang for the 2,000 reward. Thanks to reader Wurielt City for the 2,000 reward. Thank you. 62. Fire Dragon fireworks. Holy cow! Ted blurted when he saw the assignment. You're like a mouse offering itself to a cat. Aren't you afraid of courting death for a few galleons? Are you kidding me? Can I even do this? I'm asking for death. Even if I jump from here. Wait, who's that? The Weasley twins. Ahem, Hermione, I'm going to have a word with George and Fred about some boy stuff. You can go ahead, he added breezily. Hermione, startled by the sudden English, barely had a chance to ask what he meant when she watched Ted jump off the skywalk. She screamed as he fell, then saw him flick his wand, murmur something under his breath, and slowly float down as if nothing had happened. Hermione blinked. Has Ted's levitation charm gotten that good? It wasn't a silent or wandless spell. Ted had simply reduced the wand movement and shortened the incantation. That level of refinement was impressive. Even many adult wizards couldn't make their magic that efficient. Only someone who had spent a long time studying the levitation charm and had sharp insight could pull that off. Hermione narrowed her eyes. I need to read more, she told herself. In truth, the trick was less about raw skill and more about mind power's ability to simplify casting by aligning will. By the time she saw Ted again, it was dinner. News quickly spread. Ted had lost 20 house points and been given 2 weeks' detention by Professor McGonagall. What did you do? Hermione snapped. I just looked away for 1 second, and you caused trouble. Don't worry, Hermione, Ted soothed. We played a little joke on Professor Quirrell. It was a bit of harmless student-professor interaction, Fred said with a grin. It was that kind of appropriate rapport between students and faculty, George added. Harry, who had been watching, was howling with laughter. They enchanted snowballs and chased Professor Quirrell around until he fell into a snow pit. Ron chewed a huge bite of chicken and said, We weren't there. What a shame. But it's also lucky. We'd have been in trouble too if we'd been involved. Professor McGonagall is really hard to fool, Jerry muttered, ears twitching. When Ted noticed the twins demonstrating their enchanted snowballs for Quirrell, he realized this was an opportunity. In the original sequence Ted had read about, Voldemort suffered public humiliation few times. One was the Weasley twins' prank. Why not hitch a ride? 3 pranksters reduced the risk. The plan went almost too smoothly. Ted used the card he'd been rewarded from his Christmas task, chasing Snowball, and completed the requirement perfectly. The enchanted Snowball whirled through the air like a hunting bird, chased Quirrell into a panic, and sent him headfirst into a snow pit. Their only oversight was failing to notice Professor McGonagall watching from a window. She had to discipline her own students and demanded an explanation from Professor Quirrell. From her angle, she'd only seen the twins. Ted, feeling he couldn't run away and unwilling to be disloyal to his new partners in mischief, stepped forward and admitted involvement, hoping honesty would earn him leniency. Instead, McGonagall handed down a stiff punishment. Confess for leniency, and you'll be detained until the souls wear out. Double punishment, no mercy. The twins were already on record, and McGonagall was surprised to see Ted, the boy she'd taken to heart, join in their antics. He had to be punished as an example. So Ted earned 2 weeks' detention, nightly from 8 to 10 p.m. in McGonagall's office. Still, the task was completed, and Ted's sense of accomplishment made the punishment bearable. Another bit of experience and he'd level up. After dinner, as they walked to McGonagall's office, Ted examined a new card he'd received. The illustration showed a colossal dragon made of red fireworks, horns, wings, 4 limbs, and a smoke-filled maw. The caption read, Dragon Firework. Item card. Summons a massive dragon composed of magical fireworks. It has a basic consciousness and will actively seek and pursue enemies, resistant to common counterspells. Duration 5 minutes. Cooldown 3 hours. Note, it's still a firework, impressive to behold, but don't expect lethal power. Ted's spirits lifted. The earlier Boar Firecrack had been a success, and this dragon looked far cooler. As for the Neville's failed Scabies Potion Green card, judging by the name, he didn't have high hopes. Professor McGonagall's office was lined with bookshelves and roped with stacks of parchment, typical of a busy head of house. Since Dumbledore had stepped back from day-to-day matters, she handled the finer administrative details herself. She was signing papers when they knocked. Come in, she called without looking up. Ted pushed open the door gently, slipped inside, and shut it softly behind him, as meek as a lamb. He greeted her with exactly the same bright smile she'd first seen at the orphanage. McGonagall adjusted her glasses and for a moment saw the cheerful street singer she'd first noticed, how she'd written encouraging words on the flyleaf of her old Transfiguration textbook, and how shopkeepers in Diagon Alley had given him good references. Even though the boy had disrupted her first transfiguration lecture, his later performance had impressed her. She even remembered the thoughtful wool scarf he'd given her at Christmas. She noticed he wasn't wearing the new robes she'd gifted him. "Ted, don't the new robes fit?" "No, Professor. They fit perfectly," he said quickly. "Thank you. I was saving them for formal occasions." McGonagall's stern expression softened for a second, but she remembered why he was there. "So you don't consider detention a formal occasion?" Ted sat up straighter. "No, Professor. I'll wear them tomorrow." She peered over her glasses and tried not to smile. "Very well. Sit. Tell me what you did today." Ted folded into the chair like a practiced penitent and launched into a long, earnest self-critique. He explained his motive. Professor Quirrell's defense against the dark arts class was boring, which is why he'd helped enchant the snowballs. Then he catalogued, with solemn gravity, the harm in disrespecting a professor and swore never to do so again. If he ever disrespected a professor, may Ron's wand break, he pronounced dramatically. He even thanked McGonagall for taking him from the orphanage and for the Transfiguration textbook, vowing to study hard and not disappoint her. McGonagall, who had taught for decades, had never seen a student so thorough or so theatrically contrite. She didn't quite know whether to praise him or accuse him of glibness. Before she could decide, Ted pivoted smoothly to a new topic. "Professor, I was talking with Professor Quirrell about magical creature bloodlines. If he taught care of magical creatures, he'd be excellent." McGonagall's expression softened as she remembered Quirrell's school days. He was very good at care of magical creatures. He was the only student in his year to receive an outstanding on that NEDUT. Then she snapped back to business. "You don't need to worry about Quirrell. Now, here's the work for your detention." She pointed to a stack of magazines about a foot high beside her desk. "These are the past 30 or 40 issues of Transfiguration today. Since I began reviewing for them, I've kept every issue. I want you to excerpt the best articles, summarize them, and organize the key points concisely." It was a heavy assignment, meant to force long, disciplined study, perfectly suited to the painstaking art of Transfiguration. McGonagall had heard Ted read quickly. Perhaps he could use this to improve. He, of course, brightened. "Private tutoring for me? I'm fast at reading. Leave it to me." 2 hours of detention was the rule, but McGonagall had errands and approvals to deal with and didn't expect him to finish quickly. When she checked an hour and a half later, she was surprised. Ted had already worked through more than half of the pile. He'd written 4 full parchments of summaries, flipping through each issue and transcribing the key points as he went, barely looking up. McGonagall stared. What on earth was going on here? 63. New knowledge. Mind stealing. Goodbye, Professor McGonagall. Ted beamed as he waved to her, already looking forward to tomorrow's detention, tutoring. He had experience. A lot of it. Ted had transcribed the magazine, and although he'd been careful not to burden Professor McGonagall, he still finished 3/4 of it in 2 hours. Work she'd originally estimated would take him a whole week. He'd even earned nearly 200 experience points from it. Was this real life? "Professor, please give me detention anytime. Don't pity me just because I'm a delicate flower." Professor McGonagall, having reviewed Ted's summary, found it excellent, concise, accurate, well done. She was stunned and already planning what to assign him for the next few days. She also began to worry. Had she overcommitted? 2 weeks of detention might be excessive. She hadn't expected to create extra work for herself. Meanwhile, in potions class, Jerry took a heavy hit in points from Snape. He'd laughed out loud in class, a sign of contempt and disruption, and Snape sounded like he was one insult away from sending Jerry to Azkaban. When Snape called him up, he sneered, "Jerry, what are you laughing at? Is your brain full of slug slime? Do you think you know everything?" He glared over at Ted as if that last bit was meant for him. Ted thought, why pick on me? I didn't do anything. Jerry simply remembered something funny. After class, his friends tried to console him. Ron asked, "Why did you laugh so loudly? Trying to provoke Snape too?" To this day, only Ted had ever provoked Snape and come away mostly unscathed, if you didn't count the dozens of house points lost. Jerry burst into laughter again and blurted, "Do you know Ted gave Snape a Christmas present?" "What?" Harry's exclamation nearly shook the portraits off the walls. Ron's eyes widened. "A gift? For Snape? Ted, are you that sick? Hermione and Neville stared at Ted, incredulous. Ted shrugged. He's our professor. I just gave something within my means. What was it? Hermione pressed. Muggle shampoo. Ted spread his hands. Harry started laughing so hard he doubled over, clutching his stomach. They all remembered now what had been different about Snape lately. His hair wasn't greasy. It actually looked smoother. The younger students were in stitches, picturing Snape by gloomily striding down the corridor with nicer hair. Then Snape turned on them. A bunch of foolish students shouting in the corridor. Thought you'd drunk a laughing potion. 5 points off each. He swept away, his robes cutting through the night like great black wings. Good thing he didn't hear our earlier conversation, Harry said, unconcerned despite the lost points. Hermione, however, was miserable. I lost points. Ah! Ted stood frozen because his system dinged. Ding quest. A student life without deductions is incomplete. Completed. Reward. 300 experience. Random card. The quest required losing 100 points. Snape's overreaction had finished it for him. Ted had assumed the quest would last the whole term. Turns out the shampoo had paid off. Thank you, Professor. During lunch, Ted drew a card. The first was a floating kettle with eyes, a mouth, and a nose, steaming furiously. Ted's heart sank when he saw the green border. Item card. Summons a kettle that automatically attacks and continuously sprays hot water. Lasts 10 minutes. Cooldown 3 hours. Note, this notorious illegal magic item has scalded dozens of muggles and 5 or 6 wizards. Fantastic. A green card, so a blue quest could still spit out a green. The system must have been programmed by some merciless gamer. The second card had a blue border, a furbolg clutching a short wand. Ted remembered furbolgs, upright bear-like creatures from Azeroth. He'd killed more than a few back in Winterspring. Transformation stick. Item card transforms the user into a furbolg on use. +3 strength, +2 constitution, magic resistance. Elv 1. Lasts 10 minutes. Cooldown 10 hours. Note, others may not understand you and may treat you like a monster to be farmed. The third card was also blue, a faintly glowing pair of gloves set against a cluttered apothecary table full of beakers and potions. Apothecary's gloves, equip, plus LV1 potion brewing. Note, due to quality limits, does not affect potions LV5 and above. Choice was simple. The green kettle was useless. The furbolg stick was fun, but not practical. Apothecary's gloves would help his potion making. I choose Apothecary's gloves blue, Ted said. In January, there was a Quidditch match. Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff. Gryffindor wasn't up to Slytherin's level, but Hufflepuff posed no real threat, no suspense about the outcome. After the match, though, Harry and his friends collided with Malfoy in the stands. After months of practice, the younger students had picked up a few nasty little jinxes. Neville fought bravely, but took a leg locker curse and tumbled forward. Before Malfoy could mock him, Neville hopped forward with his legs stuck together and barreled through, knocking Crabbe and Goyle out of the way. Ted's physical training and tutoring over the past months had paid off. His friends were visibly improving. Malfoy, rattled, had his wand knocked away by Ted's Expelliarmus, and then was struck by Harry's hair-growing charm, sprouting a coat of platinum fur, like some kind of gilded monkey. A brawl broke out, and Ted's side won by numbers. Ron even joked, I think Malfoy has that kind of fetish. We have to indulge him properly, which earned more laughter than sense. Their victory, however, was cut short. Snape caught them and hit them with a bundle of deductions and detention. The charge? Using dark arts. To them, it sounded like being condemned. The line between jinxes and dark arts was fuzzy. Many jinxes were included. Curses like making someone lose hair were nasty, but compared to something like an intestine-extracting charm, hair loss seemed tame. That particular charm, bizarrely, was sometimes used to treat severe constipation. The inventor's portrait was rumored to hang in St. Mungo's, a proud, if unsettling, figure in proctology. While Ted earned experience every day in Professor McGonagall's office, February arrived quietly. Ted had already amassed over 6,000 experience points and was waiting for the next big thing. On February 1st, as soon as he opened his eyes, the system pinged. Ding, talent, otherworld knowledge, triggered, discovered, Shameless Priest's Mind Steal investigation file, Shameless Priestman Steele investigation file records a wizard's accusation of mental harassment by a priest, an account of a stolen mind. Requires 200 experience to exchange. Mind steal? Ted had run into that in Azeroth and at the Hearthstone Tavern. For an ordinary wizard, it wouldn't be much use, but Ted wasn't ordinary. Besides being a wizard, he was a mind mage. Anything to do with spirit and thought was valuable. He'd been wondering how to progress down the mind mage path, and now a breadcrumb had fallen from the sky. Only 200 experience. Exchange it. 200 experience drained from his pool, and Ted's mind was flooded with detailed information on mind steal as used by Azerothian priests. Because the file was written from the victim's perspective, it contained first-hand descriptions of what the victims felt and remembered. "This is good. It's Azerothian remote legilimency," Ted muttered. Legilimency needed eye contact and had range limits. Mind steal didn't. It could even erase the stolen portion of the victim's memory, like legilimency, plus a temporary memory charm. It wasn't permanent, but it was powerful. Even if this month's otherworld knowledge seemed weaker than usual, it was useful, and he still had a trove of Azeroth and D&D spells to study. Ted glanced at the 6,000+ experience points left in his pool. Should he level up? He remembered a talent at level 4. If it was another otherworld knowledge, gold. He'd be unstoppable. He made up his mind. System, upgrade wizard profession. Ding. Thanks to reader, crush your big butt for the 250 reward. 64. Talent, god of learning. Ding. Your wizard profession has leveled up. Your current level is wizard level 4. You have gained 1 attribute point, 1 skill point, and 1 talent draw. Ted thought for a moment and spent the attribute point on Spirit. Spirit was the primary attribute for both wizard and mind mage professions. Putting points into it was never a waste. He now had 11 Spirit. He used the skill point on magic power for the same reason. Other skills, spellcraft, transfiguration, potion, herbology, and so on, were still too low for a single point to make a big difference, and he could improve them by practice. Magic power, however, had innate limits and was much harder to raise in the magic world. Strengthening it now was the obvious choice. Magic power was the foundation of a wizard, and strong magic power guaranteed strong spells. As soon as he allocated the point, the magic power inside him surged. He stumbled into the bathroom where fixtures and toiletries had begun to float. Magic welled out of him, shattering mirrors and tiles. The fragments hovered in the air, unable to fall. The secondary magic power surge lasted a full 10 minutes before subsiding. His magic power had increased several times over compared to before. Judging purely by magic power, an ordinary adult wizard wouldn't be his match. Even some novice aurors might struggle. His current stat read Magic Power Level 5 +1. With a wand, he effectively had Magic Power Level 6. Some professors at the school, excluding the deans, didn't even reach that. For example, Professor Trelawney, whom Ted had once secretly appraised, was Magic Power Level 5, but had Divination Level 7, showing she was strong in her specialty. Ted used a reparo to put the bathroom back together. It had looked like a bomb had gone off, and then prepared for the main event. The talent draw. System, draw a talent. 3 cards lined up in his head. The first had a blue border and showed a figure surrounded by sharp ice spikes. Ice Bloodline, blue. Ice Bloodline, blue talent card, grants an Ice Bloodline. When using Ice-type magic, my 15% casting difficulty, plus 20% power, high chance to inflict chilling, slow, or freezing effects on targets. Immune to cold and ice. Note, having an Ice Bloodline will likely interfere with Fire-type magic, which is why this card is blue, not red. The reduction in casting difficulty means ice spells become easier, where a wand and complex incantation were once necessary. A simple gesture and word might now suffice. The power boost needs no explanation. The special effect, freezing or severe slowing, makes it excellent for crowd control. The downside is its negative effect on learning and casting fire magic. The second card had a red border and showed a figure casting a spell, while a shadow behind them cast the same thing. Dual casting, red. Dual casting, red, talent card, grants a chance to perform dual casting when you cast spells. Note, the second cast is controllable and consumes no magic power. This talent is insane. Imagine casting Expelliarmus and producing 2 disarming spells at once. Your opponent's defense collapses. Or you cast 2 layers of Protego in an instant. The enemy might not break through, even by spending twice the magic power. It can be devastating in both offense and defense. The third card had a purple border. It showed a student studying at a desk amid towering stacks of books. Study God, purple. Study God, purple talent card. Greatly increases your learning efficiency, making it easier to learn difficult and obscure knowledge and techniques. 20% experience required for magic upgrades. 9 is 10% experience required for level ups. Note, the increased learning efficiency is influenced by both intelligence and spirit attributes. No contest. The Study God purple talent made Ted's heart race. The minus 10% experience requirement for level ups alone was huge. He was only level 4, and to advance further would take a long time, especially with 2 professions. Saving that much experience would be priceless. The nice 20% for magic upgrades was equally valuable. Once a spell reached a high level, improving it by ordinary study became extremely hard, and you often had to spend experience to force an upgrade. On top of that, the talent genuinely boosted learning efficiency for self-study. A purple talent. Awesome. With Study God activated, Ted's learning speed shot up again. He had already been faster than Hermione. She was a study powerhouse, able to do a semester's worth of work in half a semester. But now, Ted's output in a single day equaled several days of her study. He could almost decipher, transcribe, and develop new spells every day. He quickly mastered the Mind Steal spell he had recently acquired, but he wouldn't use mind control on classmates. For testing, he bought a batch of white mice. Ansu had new snacks again. Mastery of Mind Steal immediately raised Ted's mind power to Elv 2. Over the next 2 weeks, he invented 5 spells: Frost Nova, commonly called Ice Ring, Fire Impact, Arcane Missiles, Detect Secret Doors, and Evil Protection. Frost Nova unleashes a burst of icy magic power from the caster, striking nearby enemies, dealing frost damage, and freezing them in place. An essential survival spell, useful for avoiding ambushes or stopping rushes. Fire Impact instantly impacts an enemy with concentrated fire damage. It has no projectile and cannot be dodged or blocked, but its damage is limited, useful for guaranteed immediate hits. Arcane Missiles fires several homing arcane missiles at a target. Once launched, they track the enemy and require no guidance. Unless the target performs a wildly evasive maneuver, they're hard to shake. They deal both magical and physical damage. Ted tested it on a century-old tree. The missiles left 2 to 3 centimeter deep gouges in the bark. Against a person, that could mean broken bones and torn tendons. Detect Secret Doors reveals all hidden doors within a 60-foot radius of the caster. Hidden entrances glow with a magical blue light, making them very obvious to the caster, handy for exploring the school and finding concealed things. Evil Protection bestows a protective effect that hampers evil creatures. It makes hostile entities feel uncomfortable and suppressed, limiting some of their power. Similar to a Muggle-repelling charm, but instead of making people remember urgent things, it directly inflicts negative effects, weakening them or forcing them to retreat. Against dark creatures, it could reduce their combat effectiveness by around 20 to 30%. It was something Ted prepared specifically for the darker denizens of the magic world. If another 3 monsters ruckus at Hogwarts occurred, this low-level spell would make them far less effective. Ted's sudden breakthroughs left Hermione bewildered. The others barely noticed. Ted had always been on another level, but Hermione felt real pressure. She'd been competing with him secretly. Before, with hard work, she could keep pace. She was used to pressure. Now, even desperate effort couldn't close the gap. Ted had gone from being fast at skimming books to being faster at reading and researching, and that terrified her. Chapter 65, Unhappy Valentine's Day. Driven by equal parts stubbornness and an indefinable state of mind, Hermione gritted her teeth, pushed herself harder, and squeezed every last ounce of energy she had. In just over a week, she developed dark circles so heavy they seemed permanent. Her hair was a tangle she no longer had the energy to fix, and she moved through the corridors like a sleepwalker. She had hoped that the arcane wisdom would help her close the gap with Ted, but instead the gap widened. Everything Ted was studying now felt utterly foreign to her. She couldn't make sense of it even when she read it. She flipped through second and third-year textbooks and found nothing similar. No matter how mature, studious, and hardworking she was still a 12-year-old, and the pressure was crushing, like preparing for a life-or-death postgraduate exam. In less than 2 weeks, her resolve finally broke. That afternoon, she stayed in the library until it closed, though her head was already spinning. On the way back, her composure collapsed. The books in her arms clattered to the floor. She sank down and sobbed until she could hardly breathe. Later, she picked them up clumsily and stumbled back to the dormitory, crying all the way. She was exhausted. She wanted to go home. She wanted her mother. Ted only learned about it after he finished his detention with Professor McGonagall. That evening, Hermione lay on her bed with a blank, unwashed face, staring at the ceiling. Her roommates were alarmed, half convinced she'd been hexed. Then a paper crane drifted through the dormitory, landed on Hermione, and unfolded into a note. Hermione, eyes red and puffy, sniffled and read it. After a few whispered words to herself, she washed her face and went to the common room to meet Ted. "Come on, I'll take you somewhere. No one else knows about it," Ted said, grabbing her hand. Ta-da! The room of requirement, the most magical room in the castle, now open to Miss Hermione. He announced it with theatrical flair. Inside, a large sandalwood door, intricately carved, had appeared. Ted had brought food and drinks the house elves had prepared and set them out. "If you're in a foul mood, eat. Big meals help, especially sweets. They cheer you up," he said as he sat opposite her. While they ate, Ted recounted his adventure over Christmas. Helena and Ravenclaw, the room of requirement, Dumbledore, and the relics he'd found. Hermione listened and then asked. Spoon paused. "So the reason you're so far ahead in your studies is because of Ravenclaw's legacy?" Ted shook his head. "Madame Ravenclaw left some research notes, but they're mainly things we wouldn't be allowed to study until 3rd year. Ancient runes basics, for example. That's not the real reason I learned faster." He looked at Hermione seriously. "What matters is, what do you want? You work so hard. What's your goal?" Hermione blinked. "What do I want? A goal." She hesitated. "An Eastern philosopher once said, 'My life is finite, but knowledge is infinite. To pursue infinite knowledge with a finite life is wrong.'" She sounded half remembering, half searching for comfort. Ted guided her gently, helping her sort through her thoughts. Were her efforts aimed at grades, spells, transfiguration, potions, or merely a sense of accomplishment? With the patient coaxing of a mind mage and a few philosophical nudges, he managed to calm her. He helped Hermione begin to examine her own heart and look for a direction of her own. It might be early for a 1st year, but Ted had pushed her to grow up fast. Sometimes geniuses are many steps ahead of others. The next morning, Ted went for a run after washing up. Neville was already warming up by the Black Lake, and the daily exercise and better diet were making the 1st years shoot up in height. Neville, in particular, was noticeably taller now. After a while, Hermione appeared too, to Ted's surprise. She had avoided sports before, but after their talk, she'd actually come along. Seeing her there, Ted breathed a private sigh of relief. The 3 of them finished their morning exercise and went to the Great Hall. The students were restless, especially the older ones. Listening more closely, they realized why. It was Valentine's Day. It wasn't a holiday for the school, and the 1st years barely cared, but Ted's system perked up. Ding. Quest triggered. Break up every couple. Hogwarts is a school for magic. Students should come to learn, not spend all day on romance. Give them a little shock from the Heavenly Dynasty. Goal: discourage as many students from pursuing romance as possible. Reward: 250 experience points. Card Sturdy Love Doll Green. Accept the judgment of the single dogs. The quest was a little vague, but Ted saw the gist. Put a dent in the Valentine's Day plans, stir up a little chaos, and calm some restless hormones. He'd done similar things before. During lunch, a string of romantic tragedies began to spread. Abandonment, love triangles, car accidents, infidelity, expulsions for sneaking around, terminal illness, impossible choices between family members, anything to make people think twice. Someone even suggested to Professor McGonagall that teachers give extra homework to keep students busy. The faces of the 4th through 6th years fell. Many ended up rushing through homework in the library, grabbing a hasty dinner. Some couples argued over the lamest pretexts and then gave each other the cold shoulder. By dinner, Ted's quest was complete. He was careful to stay anonymous, If anyone discovered he'd engineered Valentine's Day disaster, there would be hexes in his future. But he did get his reward. A card. Sturdy Love Doll. Places an extremely sturdy magical training doll that can be used as a target for various spells. Lasts 60 minutes, 2-hour cooldown. Note, it fights back. Ted tested it. The doll proved very useful. A durable target for practicing disarming charm, protective spells, and more. Its magic resistance was high. He hit it with 5 or 6 fire impacts, and it barely flinched. Functional, durable magical dummies were rare. The ones he'd found in abandoned classrooms were single-purpose, fragile, and often broke, forcing him to repair them. Using the doll, his mending charm practice improved. By late February, Professor Quirrell began contacting Ted more often. Their conversations drifted toward deeper and increasingly forbidden knowledge about magical creature bloodlines. Quirrell spoke with a new confidence, no stutter, no timidity, his posture and gaze radiating certainty. If not for the purple turban, he would have seemed a different man entirely. He showed Ted experiments, theories, and a philosophy that hinted at disregarding rules in the pursuit of power. In short, Quirrell said one afternoon, my experiments suggest that the magic of many magical creatures resides in their bloodline, and that it behaves differently from wizarding magic. That's why wizards can create new creatures, through crossbreeding or advanced ritual creation. The principles are related. He stopped pretending to be the nervous, stammering professor Ted remembered, and instead wore the authority of a man utterly confident in his field. Then he gave Ted a kind of homework, framed as an exercise for their discussions. Write a paper on the possibilities of crossbreeding and evolutionary development within canine magical creature bloodlines, Quirrell proposed. You can study creatures like Krupps, boggart hounds, those interdimensional flash dogs, winter wolves, anything you like. Some famous specimens might be especially illuminating, the French shrinking bulldog or the Greek Cerberus, for example. Quirrell's gaze was almost indulgent, as if he already thought highly of Ted's potential. 66. Useless alien knowledge and new magic. After Ted left, he shrank back into his timid self. "Ma master, can Epiphany get the Cerberus's weakness from Hagrid?" he asked hesitantly. A grim voice answered from behind him. "It doesn't matter. If he can get the Cerberus's weakness from that foolish half-giant, fine. If he can't, that's fine too. As long as he keeps chasing magic, he'll be useful to me." Lord Voldemort had been in a very good mood lately. His long-cherished ambition to become the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor had finally come true, and he took a particular pleasure in having an exceptional student. Ted fit Voldemort's ideal, endlessly hungry for power, clever, diligent, and, above all, utterly indifferent to rules and authority. Tom Riddle had an uncanny knack for sizing people up. When Professor Quirrell assigned him homework, the pressure that had been building in Ted for nearly 2 weeks finally eased. He understood what was happening. Professor Quirrell still hadn't found a way to handle the Cerberus, so he was using the Hagrid route, a sort of indirect, curved path to salvation. Ted decided to play along. He would pretend to fall for it, but refuse to hand over the Cerberus's weakness. Instead, he would use the opportunity to pick up useful knowledge and experience about magical creatures without derailing the original plot. Quirrell's private tutoring paid off. Ted's magical biology leveled up to Elv 2, even though care of magical creatures hadn't officially started. Quirrell really knew his stuff. In some of their private conversations, snippets about the dark arts slipped through as well. Obscure, fleeting insights that seemed to arrive between the lines. To anyone who didn't know better, Quirrell looked like a sterling Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Ted, however, recognized the voice of Professor Riddle underneath. Voldemort was seeding the dark arts into Ted's mind in tiny hooks that teased his curiosity. Ted wasn't particularly drawn to the dark arts, but it was undeniably intriguing, and he found himself wanting to learn more. Seeing the dark arts LV2 prompt made him wary and excited. Any bit of Riddle's knowledge that leaked out was a huge boon. March came quickly, and with it a new burst of information. A notification chimed in his head. Ding! Talent Otherworld Knowledge Gold triggered. Discovered. Dark Secret Art Raven Ninjutsu Scroll green. The message explained that Dark Secret Art Raven Jutsu Scroll recorded the creation and use of the Sand Village's puppet techniques. The dark secret art, Raven, from the Land of Wind. Redeeming it required 200 experience points. What the heck? Ted muttered, staring at the prompt. 200 experience was not that much. He could gather that in a day or 3. Even if he never used the technique, it was knowledge not native to this world, worth redeeming. He spent the experience and the scroll unfolded itself inside his mind. Puppet design, material selection, construction, and manipulation techniques all poured in at once. Ted judged the puppet art competent but limited. It wasn't as promising as Transfiguration. At its peak, think Sasori of the Red Sand from the original Naruto, the best puppet masters reached master level, but puppet arts were constrained by their manipulation limits, materials, and the functional limits of the puppets themselves. Transfiguration, by contrast, seemed to have no clear upper bound. When Ted had fought the resurrected Lord Voldemort in the original timeline, he'd used advanced transfiguration to counter dark arts in ways that could only be described as extraordinary. Dumbledore must have reached a transfiguration realm no one else in the present day had touched. In the days that followed, Ted dutifully turned in Quirrell's homework, a brief paper on canine magical creatures, and only sketched a few cautious conjectures about the Cerberus. Private tutoring dwindled, Quirrell got busier, and their one-on-one time faded. Ted hadn't picked up more otherworld knowledge, but he had a backlog of foreign knowledge to research at his own pace, so he kept busy and satisfied. He threw most of his energy into studying spells and developed a number of new magics. Featherfall, a levitation-based spell that makes the caster float as lightly as a feather. It combined easily with basic movement spells and could be used to control objects with magic to strike targets. Magic suppression creates a layer of inert magical dampening that weakens other magical effects. It suppresses spells of all kinds to varying degrees. If a wizard under magic suppression attempted a transfiguration, the result would be drastically compromised. Arcane Lock, a locking charm for doors or chests that ordinary unlocking spells and mechanical means cannot open. It's essentially the analog of an anti-Alohomora. Comprehend languages. After casting, the target can understand spoken or written languages that would otherwise be incomprehensible, useful for parsing merfolk or ancient runes. Shield conjures an invisible force barrier that floats in front of the caster, an automatically defensive, reliable protection. Mage Armor, a tangible, invisible suit of force armor around the target. This is similar to an advanced humanoid Protego, a layer of actual defensive magic. Between Frost Armor, a cold yet physical shield with backlash, the Shield Charm, dual physical and magical protection, the Shield Force Barrier, and Mage Armor, Ted now had a stable suite of defensive options. Grease covers a circular area in slick grease that causes those who enter to slip. Extremely effective when used well, especially against someone like Malfoy. Ted couldn't resist showing off. He cast grease on Malfoy and his 2 followers, who repeatedly slipped in front of the school and ended up in a greasy heap, a scene that would not have looked out of place on a slapstick variety show. Invisible Servant conjures an invisible, mindless, shapeless servant to perform simple physical tasks: fetching, opening doors, moving furniture, cleaning. Essential for anyone without a house elf, and a godsend for lazy housewives and busy wizards alike. Ted also picked up several local spells from Professor Flitwick during private lessons. Banishing Charm sends opponents flying. Weakening Charm reduces a target's strength, excellent against large creatures. Impediment Jinx slows the target's movement for a short time. Alohomora opens non-magically sealed doors and locks. He'd even learned Alohomora privately from the Weasley twins to better explore the castle. Took him 3 minutes to pick up. While rummaging through a dusty library book, he'd also found an old parchment left by some anonymous senior detailing the Tickling Charm. Tickling Charm, Rictus Empra, causes uncontrollable laughter, disrupting spellcasting and potentially incapacitating the target through laughter. Ted's focused study and the private guidance from Flitwick over more than half a month earned him high praise and more lessons. His spellcasting rose to level 3, and Transfiguration finally hit level 2. Transfiguration remained a labyrinth of complexity, but progress had been made. He'd previously dabbled in the local engorgement charm and the D&D first level enlarge person spell, but those studies had stalled. Both depended heavily on transfiguration, and without higher transfiguration levels, they were unusually difficult. With transfiguration now at Lev 2, those research paths looked more promising. 67. Easter activities and eggs. At the end of March, there was another holiday, the 2-week Easter break beginning on the 31st. Students could choose to go home or stay at school for the holiday. This time, almost all of the little wizards stayed at Hogwarts. Compared with the grandeur of Christmas, Easter wasn't as important, and it wasn't necessary to go home for a family reunion. Hermione, in particular, couldn't possibly go home. She'd missed some big event in the Ravenclaw Chamber of Secrets during the last break and still regretted it. She was frustrated by her inability to enter that chamber. Many students remained at school for the holiday. Judging by the number of people at lunch in the Great Hall, there must have been at least 60 or 70 staying. With no classes and the professors a bit more relaxed, the students naturally got up to more mischief. On Easter morning, just after Ted and his friends came back from what looked like a secret door, but turned out to be a wall disguised as a door, they ran into trouble on the first-floor corridor. A group of second- or third-year Slytherins in green-trimmed robes had surrounded a tall, plainly dressed young man with a pair of black horns. The Slytherins were openly jeering and insulting him. "Look at that face, so ugly. He's covered in mud, making the corridor filthy. Filch should sort him out. Horned half-breed. The ministry should lock them all up in Azkaban. I'll write home and have my family pressure the governors to expel these half-breeds. What a joke." Faced by 5 or 6 taunters, the horned young man clenched his fists and tried his best to control his anger. He'd worked hard to get into school and couldn't cause a scene. Then Neville exploded. "Shut up, you disgusting swines." Neville roared and charged. He was furious. Ted even noticed his hair standing on end. "Damn Slytherins! I'll teach you a lesson. Rictus Sempra." Jerry, equally outraged, drew his wand and sprang a sneak attack. Leglocker curse. Ron didn't hesitate either and fired off a spell. Harry whipped out his wand, cast an enemy-repelling jinx, and charged forward, punching a Slytherin in the face. The blow made the fellow's nose ripple. Gryffindor's champion puncher knocked him out. Though the Slytherins were a year or two older and had privately learned darker jinxes and hexes, they were no match for Ted's group. A chorus of yelps and curses filled the corridor. Ted summoned an invisible servant to haul the unconscious lot into a nearby bathroom, then clapped his hands, satisfied that the skirmish was over. Even after roughing those brats up, the little wizards remained indignant. Ron and Neville were still panting, itching for more. The horned young man had joined the scuffle too. He had tried to avoid trouble at school, but he couldn't stand by while friends defended him. He and Neville were close. The horned student's name was Goff Oasis, a second-year Hufflepuff of a horned demi-human race. He'd met Neville while helping in the greenhouses. Their similar temperaments made them fast friends. Neville had learned a great deal of herbology from Goff Oasis. After Ted, Goff was probably the biggest help Neville had received. Hermione would come in third. All that made Neville's fury at the Slytherins' bullying especially fierce. After thanking everyone, Goff Oasis left, embarrassed and downcast. Being cornered and humiliated in front of so many people stung. He'd long avoided Slytherins. He knew how disliked and discriminated against people like him could be. He had endured worse before coming to Hogwarts, and he'd hoped school would be different. Hermione's face was flushed with anger. How can they be so awful? It's simply unforgivable. Malfoy's bad enough, but these are rotten to the core. She jabbed a thick book into the air, as though she could beat them with it. The others chimed in, listing every cruel thing Slytherin House had ever done. Compared to them, Malfoy, who loved to show off and assert himself in front of Ted's group, suddenly seemed almost charming. Ted thought that if Lord Voldemort ever returned, those Slytherins would be the kind to fill the Death Eater's ranks. Harry snapped. Slytherins always think they're better than everyone else and pick on Muggle-borns and demi-humans. I'll give every one of them a piece of my mind. Neville, still red-faced, shouted, "Didn't the ministry say everyone is equal?" They said discrimination against other intelligent races isn't allowed. Why is it still like this? Poor Neville, he didn't see the reality. Everyone can be declared equal, but power decides how equal people actually are. The slogans say one thing, practice often says another. Despite the sour morning, Ted's day brightened unexpectedly. A soft chime sounded in his head. Ding, hidden quest. Easter activity completed. Reward, 280 experience points card. Easter item card summons a giant Easter egg. When touched, a large number of rabbits of various sizes will jump out and scatter. Catching one turns it into a random flavored candy. Uses 1-1. One-time prank item. It wasn't a valuable card, so Ted decided to let everyone have some fun with it. The unpleasant morning had left the mood at lunch damp. Many of the Slytherins who'd stayed at school sat at their long Slytherin table and shot strange looks at Ted's group. Apparently, they knew who'd been roughed up that morning. Ted and his friends weren't intimidated. If a Slytherin glared, they glared back. The meal ended in a battle of stares. The most frustrated person at the table was Malfoy. Why isn't anyone looking at me? Are they ignoring me? He wondered, affronted. Because the atmosphere at lunch was tense, Ted wanted to liven things up. Right in the middle of the Great Hall, he took out the Easter egg green card. Ted himself was startled by the result. The card said, a giant Easter egg, but no one expected something 2 meters tall, big enough that Hagrid could hide inside. A painted, patterned egg loomed before them, forcing everyone to tilt their heads to see it. The Great Hall fell silent, then erupted into chatter as bold students gathered around to gawk. Ted steadied himself, tapped his wand to his throat, and cast Sonorous. Hello, hello, can you hear me? His voice boomed across the hall. This is a giant Easter surprise. Everyone get ready. I'm about to activate it. Without waiting for anyone to react, he reached out and touched the egg. With a thunderous bang, the shell exploded. Streamers and golden confetti burst out, and suddenly dozens, hundreds of rabbits of every size and color popped out and scattered. Ah! Rabbits! So many rabbits! The initial screams echoed through the hall, then laughter followed. Rabbits, after all, weren't dangerous, but they were everywhere. A Hufflepuff student watched in dismay as a rabbit darted across his plate, sending pumpkin juice splashing into his soup. A Gryffindor felt something furry under his foot. A gray rabbit flashed away, and he leapt onto his stool. Nearby, a 1-meter-tall, fat rabbit lay sprawled next to Hermione and simply flopped there like a furry pancake. One particularly cheeky rabbit leapt onto a Slytherin's face. Unfortunately for Malfoy, it hit him squarely and almost toppled him back. Don't panic! Catch them! Ted called, and quickly grabbed a rabbit by the ear. A blue flash transformed it into a strange candy in his hand. Neville, acting on instinct, snatched a plump rabbit by the hind leg and got a large milk candy. Hermione cast a quick freezing charm on a heavy rabbit, picked it up, and it turned into a small bag of sweets. Now everyone realized what was happening. Students dove under tables, reached across benches, and the nimble ones chased the biggest, fattest rabbit. Several people were sent sprawling when that oversized rabbit thumped past. 3 or 4 students ended up flat on their backs. After about 20 minutes, the chaos died down. The Great Hall buzzed with laughter and chatter as students compared the candies they'd caught. Some clever kids had already begun trading treats. The holiday mood had been restored. Easter had turned spectacular. Not everyone was pleased. The Slytherin table remained sullen. But most students agreed on one thing. Every holiday, Ted seemed to produce something memorable. Next time, some whispered happily, make sure to include me. Recommending a book by a good friend, Homelander descends into American comics. Doesn't the title sound thrilling? Facing the purple sweet potato monster with a crescent moon. No, mostly because I forgot the synopsis. After leaving the Great Hall, Ted asked, among the Slytherins, who was that tall kid in the robe with the purple crest? He looked like a first year. Ted had noticed one of the first years earlier who stood out from the rest of the Slytherins. Now that his mind power had reached LV2, he could read people's attitudes from their expressions with ease, and this boy's face showed no hostility toward him or his friends, only curiosity. That was rare. Up until now, the number of Slytherins who didn't bear them ill will had been nearly negligible, at most 1 or 2. Ted didn't know the boy personally, though he'd seen him at the sorting ceremony and simply hadn't remembered his name. Harry answered, "That's Andre Lothar. The Lothars are an old family, very reputable, and they've kept a low profile for decades. I heard Sirius say that even when you-know-who was at his worst, no one from the Lothar family joined the Death Eaters." You could fake actions, Ted thought, but a person's mindset was much harder to fake. There was only one master double agent like Snape who managed to play both sides in front of two of the era's greatest wizards. Ted almost felt sorry for Snape. If not for Lily, he might have had a shot at becoming a legend. Snape looked perpetually sullen, and his hair was greasy enough to squeeze oil from, but he was only 32. Can you imagine? Among the four heads, he was the youngest, yet the most powerful. Dark arts LV8, potions LV8, and spells, transfiguration, and herbology all at LV7. Even occlumency and legilimency had reached LV8, which explained how he could convincingly be a double agent before both Dumbledore and Voldemort, two living legilimency masters. In the original story, he'd been called someone who had mastered more spells by the time he arrived at Hogwarts than many seventh years. And by his 5th year, had even invented spells like Sectum Sempra, a formidable dark arts curse. Ted himself had invented a dozen spells, but that was reverse engineering, porting a PC game to mobile, much easier. In Canon, Snape died at 38. If he'd lived to 60 or 70, becoming a legend was realistic. Sometimes Ted wondered if Voldemort killed him because he saw Snape as a threat. The Dark Lord certainly wouldn't want another Dark Lord rising. He shook himself back to the present. That Slytherin boy was special and worth keeping an eye on. The Easter break hadn't been particularly fun. Ted and his friends had spent much of the 2 weeks roaming the castle, mostly because 2 homework terminators were in their group. The others could get by borrowing work from those 2. Otherwise, the break would have been unbearable. Each Easter, many students stayed at Hogwarts, and the professors, wanting to keep idle hands busy, tacitly loaded up a mountain of homework. A normal wizarding student would need to spend 3 hours a day in the library for 10 days to finish most of it. The workload was enough to make anyone miserable. Hermione, true to form, activated her study god mode as the holiday wound down. She carried a book and a notebook wherever she went, ready to transcribe and organize at any moment. A dark cloud called "Doomed to Work" promptly descended over the rest of the group. In an empty classroom, the 6 friends gathered. Some played chess, some practiced magic, and Hermione memorized. Ron peered anxiously at her. "Hermione, are you okay? Did Ted do something to annoy you again? Tell us and we'll make him pay. Just don't be like this. It's terrifying." Jerry nodded hurriedly. Yeah, don't be mad. Come on, aren't we all getting along, right? Ha ha ha. Neville, tall and nervous, hid behind Harry and squinted at the book Hermione held. He took a deep breath. The title was so long, just looking at it made his head spin. Harry cut to the chase. "Hermione, what are you doing?" "Preparing for exams," she said matter-of-factly. At the word exam, Ron's red hair nearly stood on end. "Exam? What exam?" Ted shrugged. "She means the final exams." Jerry bared his teeth in a grin. "Isn't that still 2.5 months away? You scared me." Ted was about to joke when Hermione shot him a look, so he quickly amended. "Well, you know, better safe than sorry." Hermione took the finals seriously. It showed. Among the 6, grades were excellent. Ted and Hermione naturally occupied the top 2 spots in their year. Harry's marks hovered in the top 5 depending on his interest in the subject. Ron and Jerry copied homework more often, but still worked hard enough to keep their grades good. Neville scored very high in herbology and was average elsewhere. None of them really had cause to worry about exams. Practically speaking, their magic was strong. In applications, they outperformed most of their year and even surpassed some second years. Their favored spell, the one they used most often, was the revealing charm, an occupational hazard of exploring Hogwarts. They found everything suspicious and wanted to cast Revelio on it. April came, and new Otherworld knowledge pinged into Ted's mind. Ding! Talent Otherworld knowledge gold triggered. Discovered Lone Wolf Ash's crafting method, green. Lone Wolf Ash's crafting method described the technique used by the Lands Between Witch to craft Lone Wolf Ashes. It required 260 experience points to unlock. Ted hadn't actually played Elden Ring. He mostly watched other people play, but he recognized the name. Lone Wolf Ashes would be a summoning item. Still, he had experience to spare and liked keeping curiosities on hand, so he exchanged the points. After acquiring the knowledge, he found it stranger than he'd expected. This wasn't a conventional magic field. Following the notes in his head and substituting some materials, he could probably make something that summoned spirits, but the underlying principles were hard to grasp. Studying it properly would require many experiments. Ted reflected on his prior experience. Azeroth and D&D style magic had been the easiest to map to Hogwarts sorcery, different in details, but still within a familiar magical framework that could be localized and tested. Mind power and psychology-adjacent abilities were similar to spells in effect, but operated on different principles, so he'd studied them through Muggle psychology and progressed more slowly. This ashes crafting method, however, felt like a form of spirituality or animism. He dug up some references and found that similar practices had existed in some Nordic folk religions centuries ago, but had now faded into obscurity. Ted laughed to himself. Am I doing magical archaeology? After swapping for the new otherworld knowledge, Ted decided to advance his Mind Mage class. He'd been putting experience into his Wizard class and had reached level 4, but getting to level 5 required 10,000 XP. Even with the talent reduction, it still needed 9,000, something he couldn't afford anytime soon. So he focused on Mind Mage instead to claim the smaller reward. With the Study God talent reducing the requirement by 100 points, leveling Mind Mage from 1 to 2 cost only 900 experience. That granted him 1 attribute point, which he added to Spirit. Mind Mage didn't give skill points, it directly raised his mind power and mind resistance. Now both were at LV3, 69, Big Neck and Dragon Egg. When April arrived, the weather in the Scottish Highlands finally warmed, and students had started wearing lighter robes. From the towers of Hogwarts, the countryside showed a faint wash of green, but up close, the new grass was still thin and patchy. Early in the month, the school resumed Quidditch with Ravenclaw against Slytherin, and Snape was the referee. Ravenclaw were no pushovers, but against the shameless Slytherins, they were already at a disadvantage. When people with scruples face those without them, winning is mostly a matter of luck. Having Snape officiate made things worse. The match lasted an hour and a half. By the end, Snape had penalized Ravenclaw a dozen times and awarded Slytherin 6 free throws. If red cards had been in play, he could have sent the whole Ravenclaw team, substitutes included, off the field by halftime. Honestly, even Ted, who didn't care much for Quidditch, was disgusted. He wanted, if only for once, to see a proper show of spirit to make Snape take notice. Instead, Slytherin walked away with the win, and students from the other houses seethed in silence. The stands buzzed with muttered curses aimed at Slytherin or at Snape. "Refund! Give us our money back!" But no one dared say much aloud. As tempers simmered, Malfoy and his 2 lackeys barreled into the clearing, announcing themselves with raucous laughter. Malfoy's blonde hair was slick as oil. He sprang into the center and blocked Ted and the others with an exaggerated leap. Spring had breathed life back into him, perhaps because it had been days since someone had taught him a lesson, or maybe he'd simply been itching for trouble. Before he could start, though, Harry was already looking for someone to vent on. She didn't wait to hear what Malfoy would say. She simply struck. In a flash, she delivered a lightning-fast punch that made Malfoy's face swim. He staggered, vision going black around the edges, then felt a crushing grip at the back of his neck. Harry moved like a trained fighter, one arm clamped around his throat while her other hand secured his wrist and held him in an unyielding necklock. "Help! Help me!" Malfoy tried to pry the slender, immovable arm away with one hand, while the other fumbled toward Crabbe and Goyle. His 2 companions were, predictably, rattled. Big as they were, they'd spent a lifetime being pushed around, and it had left them skittish. Their legs trembled. Still, loyalty to their boss mattered. One of them let out a shaky roar, shut his eyes, and charged. The other, seeing that, followed. Outnumbering someone had always been the Malfoy way, but Ron, Neville, and Jerry were ready. Ted, who generally preferred not to bully the weak, stepped in with a quick spell that locked Goyle's legs and sent him sprawling, He crashed into Crabbe and knocked him down as well. Ron and the others moved in and pinned the two large boys, twisting arms behind backs and holding legs down until they lay as meek as trapped beasts. Ted shook his head and told Hermione, who was watching with a half-exasperated, half-amused expression, that Malfoy trio just keeps getting worse. They were bullies with the persistence to become real troublemakers, and Ted was relieved when Hermione gave a small shove and he released his hold on Malfoy. The referee's signal had been clear. The scuffle was over. Harry pouted as Ted let go. "Why did you stop me? I wanted to teach him a lesson. Maybe then he'll think twice next time." "If you hadn't let him go, he'd have passed out," Ted said. "You don't want him in the hospital." Harry huffed but didn't argue further. Hermione muttered from the side, "You attacked him before he even said anything." "I know exactly what he's going to say the moment he opens his mouth," Harry shot back. "I didn't need to wait." Malfoy, once he'd recovered enough to stand, did what Malfoy always did. He ranted. "You lot, Weasleys, that 5-foot freak, Longbottom the useless prat, a universally hated rat, and Miss Know-It-All." He babbled on, his voice a high, desperate squeal. Goyle and Crabbe chimed in with boastful threats in the same breathless, empty way. "If we weren't starved at lunch, we'd have beaten them to a pulp." "And I'm a bit hungry again," one of them added, as if that justified everything. "Get out of here!" Malfoy stamped his foot and fumed. When Ted and the others dispersed, indignation simmered, but life at Hogwarts moved on. That afternoon, they had an appointment with Hagrid, who'd sent a mysterious note saying he had something special to show them, and to come quietly. The 6 of them took some food, none of them trusted Hagrid's cooking entirely, and set off for his hut near the edge of the Forbidden Forest. The trees by Hagrid's place were further along than most. Buds and tiny leaves already speckled the branches. Hagrid's door was a thick slab of wood that looked like it had been split from an enormous log. When he opened it, his voice thundered from inside. His great, shaggy head peered out with bright, beetle-like eyes that darted left and right. Hermione, ever suspicious, sniffed, "Hagrid, you aren't doing anything improper?" "Of course not," Hagrid answered a little too loudly, then softer. "Raising creatures is a gamekeeper's work. Nothing wrong with that." He hesitated then, seeing their expectant faces, surrendered. "All right, but you mustn't tell anyone, got it?" Inside, heavy curtains hung over the windows, and despite the warming weather, a solid fire burned in the stove. Heat washed over them as Hagrid tossed open the iron-flapped stove door. Everyone leaned in. Nestled among the glowing embers was an egg. It wasn't like any ordinary egg. It was large and oddly shaped, greenish-blue despite the surrounding red coals, with a shell covered in layered, scale-like bumps and tipped with tiny, sharp thorns. From a distance, it could have been a strange pineapple or a green dragon fruit. Ted's first thought was uncharitable but instant. Whoever had given birth to that must have had a rough time. They stood there, stunned and whispering, as the small, prickly thing lay warm in the heart of the fire. 70, the main line is back? A dragon's egg? Harry blurted. Hagrid started, then broke into a delighted grin. "Harry, you know what it is?" Harry nodded. "It really is a dragon's egg. I've only ever seen pictures like this in books." Ted felt a little envious. The Black and Potter family collections were treasure troves of old knowledge. No wonder the Marauders had managed things like the Marauder's Map and their animagus transformations at school. Harry had access to that kind of library now. Hagrid, looking as pleased as a child despite his 300-pound frame, practically beamed. "Yes, a dragon's egg, no mistake. A Norwegian ridgeback, very rare." His voice bubbled with pride. Hagrid had always had a soft spot for huge, dangerous beasts. "Hatching one isn't simple. I'll need to turn it every 3 hours. I've dug up a load of books about dragons." He nodded toward a stack on the table, books he'd borrowed from the library, though their titles did not inspire confidence. Dragons from Birth to Blaze, Raising Dragons for Pleasure and Profit, From Egg to Being Burned Alive, A Guide to Rearing Dragons. Not exactly scholarly. Ted was pretty sure feeding a baby dragon whiskey mixed with chicken blood wasn't a reputable method. Anyway, Ted himself had a dragon egg, an Azeroth red dragon egg, far stranger in origin, but hatching it was a problem, and the egg's provenance couldn't be explained openly. They all stared at the egg sitting in the stove's charcoal, hardly believing it was real. Ron, bewildered, asked, Hagrid, isn't it illegal to raise dragons? Hagrid's grin faltered. Well, not exactly. Well, we're a bit different. Does Dumbledore know? Hermione asked. Hagrid opened his mouth and went silent. Ted saw where this was going. Hagrid had invited them in to share his excitement, and they were clobbering him with questions. He waved a hand. Let's not worry about that now. At least until it's too big to keep inside, we can leave the worrying for later. Hagrid relaxed, relieved. That's Hagrid for you, optimistic to a fault. Tomorrow's problems could wait. Today, he had an egg to hatch. The conversation shifted. The legality of dragon rearing faded as everyone admired the egg. They were kids, wizards at that, and laws felt distant next to something none of them had ever seen for real. Harry asked suddenly, practical as ever, Where did you get it, Hagrid? Trading or selling dragon eggs is illegal, and Norwegian ridgeback eggs are the sort of thing smugglers bring in. Hagrid scratched his head awkwardly. I won it in a card game. The others blinked. You won it? Hagrid grinned. The fellow thought he could beat me. Foolish bloke. He went on to tell the tale. He'd met a shady man in the Hog's Head. The man had been stuck with the egg and worried about getting rid of it. They drank and argued about magical beasts, and then cards were played, and Hagrid came away with the egg. He said he didn't think I could look after it, Hagrid said proudly. I told him I can handle things. Cerberus does what I tell it when I play music. Hermione's ears pricked up. Cerberus, the three-headed dog? Harry immediately thought of the monstrous three-headed creature that had left an impression on them, the enormous dog that had slobbered everywhere. Is that Cerberus yours? Ron asked, finally piecing things together. If Hagrid already had a room-sized three-headed beast to deal with, a dragon might seem manageable. Ted swallowed hard. He remembered how terrifying that dog had been the first time he'd seen it. Its heads were as big as small tables. Its growl could rival a tractor. The three-headed dog had guarded a secret door on the third floor, something none of them had dared to open. Even Professor Quirrell and the weakened Lord Voldemort had been put off. After weeks of pranks and plans, the students had given up trying to get past it. Hagrid hesitated. No, Cerberus isn't mine. I don't have. Under the weight of their stares, he sighed and admitted, All right, it's mine. I bought it from a Greek smuggler when it was less than a month old, smaller than my hand. That smuggler didn't know how to care for it, Hagrid went on. It was nearly dead. I couldn't let it die, could I? He glanced at Hermione, then added, Dumbledore knows about Cerberus. It was Dumbledore's idea to use it to guard the door. Oh! Hagrid slapped a hand over his mouth, as if he'd said too much. Harry hardly cared what Hagrid tried to conceal. This was the first real clue they'd had in months. What is Dumbledore hiding that needs Cerberus to guard it? He pressed. Hagrid leaned back, clearly uncomfortable. Nothing. No, I don't know anything. I didn't say anything. Tell us, Hagrid, they urged. I can't say, Hagrid protested. See, you know, Neville said. Oh, don't force me, Hagrid groaned. I promised. Ted couldn't resist. But you already told us the dog's weakness. I didn't, Hagrid protested. You told the man who lost you the dragon egg, Harry said. Hagrid made a noise that was halfway between a laugh and a groan. Hermione pressed on. You said music makes it sleep, didn't you? No, don't. Hagrid's voice was full of misery. Neville turned his head away. Harry kept at it. Even if you won't say what's behind the door, we could play music, make it sleep, and see for ourselves. Don't! No! You can't! That's Dumbledore's and Nicholas Flamel's secret. Oh. Hagrid slapped his hand over his mouth again, and this time he really shut up. But the hint had slipped out. Nicholas Flamel? Hermione muttered, racking her brain. Flamel was centuries old and rarely mentioned in modern sources. She couldn't place the name at first. Ted, however, had the answer ready. Flamel was one of the greatest alchemists, Ted said. He created the only philosopher's stone, the sorcerer's stone, the ingredient for the elixir of life, and capable of transmuting base metals into gold. He and Dumbledore worked on uses for dragon's blood. It's even on Dumbledore's chocolate frog card. Oh, Hermione slapped her forehead. How could I forget? Next time, slap your own leg, Ted muttered, rubbing his own thigh. Ron's eyes widened. You mean it can turn lead into gold? Dumbledore hid the stone behind Cerberus? Ron's brain seemed to short-circuit, clogged by the thought of instant wealth. For a moment they all stood there, half excited, half horrified. Hagrid, on the other hand, slumped. He'd blurted out Dumbledore's secret to 6 wide-eyed kids and felt like he'd failed his friend and boss. He looked utterly done in. It had to be said, Dumbledore must have trusted the wrong keeper. Hagrid was a sieve for secrets. Between Professor Quirrell, Voldemort, Neville, and now the students, news spread fast. Winning the dragon egg had, it turned out, been a clever move by whoever had set this up. First, it had gotten Hagrid talking and revealed Cerberus's weakness. Second, it kept Hagrid busy, incubating and tending the dragon, which meant he would be less likely to patrol the Forbidden Forest. Perfect cover if someone wanted to go after the unicorns there. Ted made a mental note. He would avoid the Forbidden Forest for the rest of the year. If Voldemort was lurking about, he had no desire to meet him. The system, however, had other plans. Ding, task triggered, Forbidden Forest adventure. Half of Hogwarts treasures are inside the castle, and half are in the Forbidden Forest. Countless secrets and wonders lie there. You cannot pass 7 years at Hogwarts without exploring the Forbidden Forest. Goal: explore the Forbidden Forest. Progress: 0/100%. Reward: 1,200 experience points, +1 Magizoology level. Random card. There are thousands of magical creatures, and the Forbidden Forest holds half of them. Although Professor Quirrell now knew Cerberus's weakness, he still had no idea what other challenges the professors had prepared. He couldn't act rashly. There was only one chance. Ted wasn't about to invite disaster, and he also had to keep his little wizards from getting involved. Forcing them with a strict ban would only backfire on those rebellious kids. The smarter way was to keep them too busy to bother. So Ted's after-school little class started up again. Using the need for practical magical experience as an excuse, he set up a practice class. He split his students into groups of 5 and joined one of the groups himself. Mornings were for warm-ups and theory, afternoons were for dueling practice. Ron and Jerry huddled together and trembled. For several days straight, the program was relentless. Morning drills, theory, and in the afternoons, concentrated duels. After a few days, everyone, Ron, Jerry, even energetic Harry, was exhausted, falling asleep the moment their heads hit the pillow and sleeping through the night. Night wandering? Non-existent. In just 1 week, they forgot all about Cerberus and the Philosopher's Stone. Children's attention spans being what they were, their obsessions burned bright and died quickly. April passed quietly. His students were kept busy. Quirrell had his own concerns and life ran on. But Ted did finish another long-term project. He unlocked the Academy model, Blue. After more than 7 months, he had finally accumulated the needed points and received 300 experience points. The 3 reward cards were Fire God's Pathfinding, Blue, spell card. Allows mastery of an advanced spell combining Transfiguration, Incendio, and Fire Control, shaping flames into walls and channels to carve a path through hordes of humanoid creatures. Note, requires Transfiguration Level 3, Spell Level 4, Incendio Level 4, Fire Control Spell Level 3. The image on the card showed a white-haired old wizard extending a wand and forming twin walls of flame. The more Ted looked, the more the figure reminded him of Dumbledore. He remembered a similar technique used in the original tale to drive off in Fairy in the cave where the fake Slytherin locket was hidden. Was it possible Dumbledore had invented this? The skills requirements weren't low. Frost Trap, Blue. Spell card consumes a small amount of magic to set a frost trap within a 10-meter radius. Targets that touch it are frozen in ice. Duration depends on relative strength. Note, magic traps can affect non-corporeal targets, ghosts included. Ted grinned at that. It was essentially an Azeroth hunter's skill. The fact it could trap non-physical targets made it particularly useful. Earth Golem, Blue. Summon card. Summon an Earth Golem to fight for you. Duration 10 minutes, cooldown 8 hours. Oh, this one's good, Ted said aloud to himself. Ted liked summon cards. He preferred having a line of heavy hitters in front of him rather than doing everything personally. A wizard without meat shields up front wasn't a wizard at all. He'd once summoned a troll, Blue, in an abandoned classroom. Its only real flaw was the smell and low intelligence. It needed commands, but its combat power was astonishing. Without someone directing it, a troll was just a clumsy battering ram. Under proper command, even 3 to 5 adult wizards would have trouble dealing with it. The Earth Golem, being blue quality, promised to be strong. Ted summoned it to test it. It stood 3 meters tall, its body soft mud wrapped around stones, 2 stone eyeballs for a face. It could see. Its intelligence wasn't high, but it wasn't as stupid as a troll. It stood obediently without constant orders, perhaps only turning its head a little. Its lethality wasn't the raw brutality of a troll, but its defense was exceptional. The golem possessed a magic resistance shell that could even nullify low-level spells. Ted tried everything: Leglocker Curse, Densaujo, Expelliarmus. None did anything significant. Even his own Ice Arrow and Ice Ring barely nicked it, a sliver of damage and a freezing effect that lasted less than 3 seconds. Ordinary attacks were essentially useless against that thick, heavy mud body. It wasn't slow either. A 3-meter stone giant charging at you, shrugging off spells, was terrifying. One good hit could beat you half to death. With the troll and the earth golem as his 2 guardians, Ted felt secure. As long as he didn't provoke the truly powerful wizards, he wasn't overly worried about the usual dangers of the magic world. Spring turned into May, and new knowledge updates were expected. One pinged. Talent, Otherworld Knowledge, Gold, triggered and revealed. Shinobi Prosthetic Crafting Blueprint. Shinobi Prosthetic Crafting Blueprint, green, records methods for crafting, enhancing, and using the shinobi prosthetic devised by the master craftsman and peerless physician Dogen, engraved with karma by the sculptor, the ninja Sekiro. Requires 150 experience to exchange. Useless. Ted scoffed at first. He assumed it was just the prosthetic arm from Sekiro and that the technical content would be low. It was the cheapest knowledge he'd seen, only 150 experience. But after exchanging for it, he realized he'd underestimated it. It contained a surprising amount of technical information and a wide range of possibilities. A prosthetic limb could house an umbrella shield, absorb and resist magical and physical damage, but it could also be weaponized. Guns, shuriken launchers, grappling hooks like a spider web, flame sprayers, blades or axes, even mechanisms for invisibility or decoys. Some modules could provoke beasts into frenzy. The prosthetic had a compatibility system for different magic tools. In other words, it was a platform, modular, adaptable, and deadly. Where the Black Secret Technique, Crow, was brilliant puppet technology, the Shinobi prosthetic offered complementary advantages. Applied cleverly, its concepts could even upgrade the puppet Crow. Every world has something to teach me, Ted thought. Even if he hadn't unlocked powerful otherworld knowledge for months, his accumulated reserves were plenty to study for a while. By May, he'd already begun studying second-level spells from DD. That Friday morning was potions, a big class for all 4 houses. Since Ted got his potioner's gloves, blue, his potion making had smoothed out considerably. The low-level textbook brews that had once given him trouble were now almost effortless. He worked like an experienced potioner. But Snape's standards had risen accordingly. He became harsher and more exacting. Either the ingredients were processed imperfectly, the water bath was unstable, or the students followed the recipe with no originality, too textbook, too mechanical. In short, Snape was unsatisfied. "Don't think boiling something by the book counts as potion making," he snapped. "The recipes are the safest and the simplest, not the best. If you can't find your own method in this subject, you'd be better off giving it up now. You're not cut out for it." Snape's barbs were vicious, but the students were used to it. Those who crumbled under that pressure fell further behind. Those who adapted grew. Whether Snape intended to forge them or just enjoyed insulting them was anyone's guess. In this class, only Ted and Hermione showed real talent, though Snape still looked down on them both. During lunch, Ansu flew in. Ted held out an arm, and the bird settled. "I was wondering why you weren't here earlier," Ted said. "I thought you'd gone searching for a wild meal." Ansu shook his head, gave a little ruffle, and dropped a small folded note at Ted's feet. "Who's it from?" Ted asked. "Hagrid," Ansu croaked. Ted opened the note. In Hagrid's large, hurried scrawl, "It's about to be born. Come quickly." Ted's appetite vanished. "Whose letter is it?" Hermione asked, craning her neck. "Hagrid," Ted said, spreading strawberry jam on his bread. "Hagrid, what did he say?" Harry asked around a meat pie. "He says it's about to hatch." They all stared. Ron pulled a chicken bone from his mouth. "What's about to hatch?" he asked blankly. "Told you, Norbert?" "Who's Norbert?" "Ah, Ron clapped a hand over his mouth when he realized Hagrid had named the yet unhatched dragon Norbert. He nearly spat out his lunch. Let's go! Harry shoved the rest of his pie in his mouth, wiped his hands, and stood. I haven't finished eating yet, Neville protested, but Ron and Jerry yanked him up and dragged him along, Neville squealing the whole way. The six of them rushed off so quickly they drew no real attention, except from Draco Malfoy. Malfoy had been watching. Though every attempt to settle scores with these Gryffindors usually ended in a thrashing, he was persistent. He gathered his dim-witted cronies and followed. To be fair, more than a month had slipped by and Ted had nearly forgotten all about the dragon egg. Apparently, dragon eggs took a long time to hatch. Today was May 5th, almost 5 weeks, and they hurried for fear of missing it. Most people might not ever witness a dragon hatch in their lives. They knocked. Hagrid opened the door, beaming. You're here. Come in quick. It's starting. This morning it started wiggling and got stronger, Hagrid said breathlessly. I supposed it was hatching, so I sent Ansu out to tell Ye. He ran straight into the Forbidden Forest and found you lot. Hagrid lifted the lid off the stove. The egg sat in the hot coals. It hadn't been blackened, and it trembled every few seconds like something eager to break free. Crack, a faint sound. Hagrid practically squealed. Ye heard it, didn't ye? Ye heard it! Listen, listen, Ron pointed. A tiny fissure had appeared across the shell. Take it out, Hagrid. It can't stay in the stove, Ted urged. Aye, right? Hagrid hurried into thick dragon hide gloves, gloves big enough to make a pair of leather hats for Ron and Jerry, and plucked the egg out. More hairline cracks spread. Then a hard, sharp nose pushed through. It's coming out! It's coming out! Oh! Hagrid was crying with joy as if the hatchling were his own child. The hatching took about 5 minutes. The baby dragon broke free on its own and pulled itself onto the table. It was not beautiful in any conventional sense. Wrinkled, long-tailed, almost like a big scrawny bat or a crumpled black rag with a ridge of little bumps down its spine. Ron and Jerry's faces said the same thing wordlessly. That's it? A dragon is a dragon, though. Within 5 minutes, the hatchling could lift itself, crawl, and give a tiny roar. When Hagrid reached a cautious hand out to prod it, the creature blew a flash of flame the size of a lighter. Hagrid, utterly enchanted, gushed, "This is a Norwegian ridgeback. Look at him. How beautiful." As if on cue, the hatchling let out another puff of fire. This one scorched part of Hagrid's beard. "Oh, don't you do that, Norbert. You're Mommy's good boy. Don't be getting temperish." Ron recoiled. "Not a mother, Hagrid." Ted picked up a piece of eggshell from the table. "Can I have some of this?" "Take it," Hagrid said with a wave of his hand. Dragon eggshells can be useful for potions. Ted grinned. He had ideas, some otherworldly knowledge, and a shinobi prosthetic that might make use of the shell. He wasn't planning on losing a limb, but it never hurt to be prepared. Hagrid, who seemed oblivious to the value of such things, barely noticed. His sitting cushions were woven of unicorn hair, after all. The others watched the baby dragon with a mix of awe and worry. Hermione consulted her memory. I read that Norwegian ridgebacks develop fire early. They're true fire breathers by 1 to 3 months. Ted added, "Give it a month and Norbert will be as big as a cow or a horse. And then..." They all glanced around the little hunting lodge, envisioning the front door lighting up and everything going up in flames. Outside, Ansu's distinctive calls cut through the air, a mocking raucous that sounded suspiciously like, "Caw, caw, horse manure. Horse manure's peaking. Horse manure." Ansu swooped and pecked, and the Malfoy trio, who had been lurking too close, scattered, clutching their heads. With a 70-centimeter wingspan, Ansu had no trouble sending them running. The bird landed on the fence and cawed triumphantly. Through the window, the 6 of them watched Malfoy slink off, clearly chastened. Neville wrung his hands. "Do you think Malfoy'll tell?" "Don't worry," Ted said. "Even if he does, who'll believe him? Telling on a student's one thing, but who's going to take his word over Hagrid's?" As it turned out, Malfoy did boast, privately, to his Slytherin friends that he'd seen a dragon hatch. He'd caught a glimpse, yes, but Ansu had given him a proper pecking, and then no one believed his tall tales. His classmates humored him politely enough. Whatever makes you happy, but none took him seriously. That stung. Malfoy swore he'd find proof, so he started shadowing the group of 6. They noticed him following everywhere like a bad smell. His stalking was clumsy, often frozen in place, pretending to admire a view when caught. The Gryffindors decided not to let it stand. At dinner, the subject came around again. Malfoy, as always, exaggerated his story into something more dramatic. With a snap, a flash of fire, the egg exploded, as if it were a booby-trapped battlefield. His listeners wore faces that begged him to stop. Even Pansy Parkinson, usually ready to flatter, rolled her eyes. She'd heard several versions and was beginning to dream of dragon bombs. Ted leaned in with mock concern. Honestly, our young Master Malfoy should see Madame Pomfrey for some dreamless sleep potion. Stop daydreaming so much, it might be disordering his mind. Jerry chimed in, equally teasing. Always so kind, Ted, even to little liars full of fancy tales. Don't be nasty, Malfoy sputtered, red with anger. You two, one mudblood and one freak. 20 points from Slytherin, a cold voice interrupted. Professor McGonagall had come up the desk, frost on her features. Malfoy, how dare you utter such venom? 2 weeks' detention. Malfoy opened his mouth to protest, then found nothing to say. Ron, grinning, waved a chicken leg at Ted and Jerry. If you two keep this up, our young master of manure will be fit to pop before graduation. Ted shrugged. Then I suggest he broaden his mind. Good health to him, Jerry added. They high-fived. Laughter bubbled through the great hall, and for a moment the whole place felt light and happy. On the second Thursday of May, Ted and the others went to see Hagrid and Norbert again. Ted's original estimate had been conservative. In just over a week, the dragon was already about the size of a large dog. The weather had begun to warm, but Hagrid still wore his moleskin overcoat and dragonhide gloves as he wrestled with Norbert, who was gnawing and biting at everything. The combative Norwegian Ridgeback had already shown his destructive side. Fang had lost fur from one of his tails to a bite. Hagrid found it exceptionally hard to be strict with the creature, and in a careless moment, Norbert bit Ron's finger. It was only a small cut, but dragon saliva was poisonous. They hurried to the hospital wing. By the time they arrived, Ron's finger had swelled red and thick as a carrot. Madam, Ron's been bitten by some kind of creature, Harry blurted out. Madame Pomfrey looked at him as if she'd heard worse. When she was finished, the stump of bandages left Ron with his hand wrapped like an amputated limb. In one afternoon, he had become a semi-invalid. Though Ted and the others had been on their guard against Malfoy, Ron's conspicuous appearance, fresh from the battle with the dragon, made it hard to hide anything. Malfoy was already suspicious, and now his suspicions were confirmed. Ted and the others discussed Norbert with Hagrid. Something had to be done. The dragon was already tearing apart the place. If they waited another month, Hagrid would have to wrestle him in the Forbidden Forest. Norbert was too wild. Dragons had an enormous streak of wildness. Ted had thought about taming from the moment Norbert hatched and had even mentioned it to Professor Quirrell after class. Quirrell had laughed. Ted, you're a bit fanciful. Wizards have tried to tame dragons for ages. It's not impossible, but it's extremely difficult. Most wizards would sooner breed something new and powerful than try to domesticate those beasts. Quirrell's expression had the almost patronizing air of someone saying, "You're still too young." Still, Ted and Quirrell got on well privately. Quirrell's research was unorthodox, and Ted had no problem with that. If the ministry knew about some of those experiments, a fine would be the least of Quirrell's troubles. They could talk shop and the big questions of magical research. Quirrell liked having someone who could talk back. The one annoyance was the whispering voice of Professor Tom, Quirrell's darker side, always trying to plant subtle ideas about the dark arts. Ted had no love for that. Back to Norbert. Even Hagrid admitted he probably couldn't keep him for long. Burning down the hut would be the least of his worries. If the dragon got any larger, it would begin hunting people. Releasing him into the Forbidden Forest was out of the question. This species had no natural predators and could fly. It would become a pest. Then Ron had a bright idea. My brother Charlie works as a dragon tamer in Romania. I'll write to him. Charlie had just graduated and now worked at what was essentially Romania's dragon sanctuary under their ministry, a semi-protected breeding and conservation area, not a farm, where dragons were managed and kept away from muggles. Ron wrote, and over the weekend, Charlie replied. He and some colleagues would come to Hogwarts secretly next Saturday night on brooms and fly Norbert away. The dragon's dubious origin made official channels impossible. They told Hagrid and were all relieved. But Hagrid's reply owl ran into trouble. The school's owl was intercepted by Malfoy. Ted and the others did not yet know Malfoy had seen Hagrid's message. Malfoy didn't make a scene. He thought this was the perfect chance to get at Harry and the others. So on Saturday night, the two groups met at the astronomy tower. The Gryffindor 4 had carried a large wooden crate containing Norbert, covered it with the invisibility cloak, levitated it up to the tower, and handed it off to Charlie and his crew for transport. Everything went smoothly. They even remembered the invisibility cloak. But coming down the tower, they ran straight into Malfoy and his two cronies lying in wait. Hagrid's letter had been messy. His handwriting was worse than usual, especially in a low, tearful mood, and it hadn't clearly said that Norbert was being taken away. Malfoy only understood that Harry and his friends planned to bring a dragon into the castle that night, and that Hagrid seemed ready to help. So Malfoy ambushed their escape route, convinced he'd have something to gloat about. "Ha ha! Out roaming at night. If I tell Professor Snape, you'll get detention for months. He might even have you expelled," Malfoy crowed, a smug grin spreading over his face. He had waited for a payoff like this for a long time. Revenge, 10 years in the making. He thought it almost poetic. Harry stepped forward. "It's you again, Malfoy. What do you want?" Malfoy's smile turned venomous. "What do I want? Heh, I want the dragon. Hand it over, and I won't tell the professor." "You want a dragon?" Harry said, incredulous. Malfoy almost couldn't hide his satisfaction. "Keeping a dragon privately is illegal," he said, with the affected dignity of someone who thought he knew how to manipulate the system. "But I can convince my father to keep one at home." He did a little imitation of his father as he glided a few steps, looking down his nose at them. "It's better for everyone if you just give it to me." Malfoy was reveling in triumph, so satisfying he wanted to shout it to the sky, but Harry only snorted. "You haven't woken up yet." Malfoy's face soured. "You can't hide it. Give it to me. I'll take good care of it." He needed the dragon badly. He loved them almost as much as Hagrid did. After all, his name was Draco. But it was a shallow love. If he actually had to care for a dragon, he probably would have found it less appealing. Harry, for once playing with Malfoy, refused to give in and didn't mention that Norbert had already been taken away. He teased Malfoy until the situation reversed and the pale boy found himself begging. "You," Malfoy spluttered, pride draining from him. "Fine, then can I at least touch it?" "I'll only touch it." His voice wobbled. Harry raised an eyebrow. "You saw Ron's hand." "I won't get bitten," Malfoy retorted. "Are you saying you're tougher than Ron?" "I don't care," Malfoy suddenly said, on the verge of a tantrum. "You have to let me see it. Just let me see it." Harry had to bite down to stop himself laughing. "Too late," he said. "It's already been sent away." "What? You tricked me." Malfoy's voice climbed an octave. At that moment, a cold, sharp voice cut through the night. "Who's out after curfew?" Professor McGonagall, in her dressing gown and hair in a sensible bun, rounded the corner. Chapter 74, Forbidden Forest Adventure. Everyone froze. They had wasted too much time wandering about and had drawn Professor McGonagall's wrath. Goodness me. Nighttime roaming, making a racket. How arrogant. McGonagall had seen 4 from her own house and 3 from Slytherin. It was a group offense. 20 points from each of you. Detention for a month. The next morning, the hourglasses at the entrance to the Great Hall told the story. Gryffindor had lost 80 points, Slytherin 60, and the noise that followed was immediate. Ted had been chipping away at points for months with Professor Snape's quiet help, losing a few points each class to reach 100 in total. And now 80 in one night? Students from both houses stared at the culprits with new expressions. Ted dared to hope the House Cup might still be within reach, then remembered Dumbledore. Of greater concern to him was the detention itself. McGonagall left the matter of carrying out the punishment to Filch, and Filch's idea of discipline went no further than cleaning toilets and polishing trophies. But the usual troublemakers, Harry, Malfoy, and the others, were Filch's favorites. He took particular delight in assigning them to patrol duty in the Forbidden Forest. They couldn't refuse. The Forbidden Forest, dangerous at the best of times, full of man-eating acromantulas, unfriendly centaurs, and other dark, unpredictable creatures, was the last place anyone wanted to be wandering at night. Malfoy, told he would be spending 2 hours in the forest every evening for the next fortnight, was terrified. He wanted to write to his father. Harry teased him mercilessly, but the boy's fear was genuine. The next evening, Filch brought the 7 students to Hagrid with a grin that could hardly be called pleasant. "Don't go easy on him," he said. Hagrid didn't care much for Filch. "I know what I'm doing. I don't need your help teaching detentions," he muttered. For most of the school, Filch was, at best, a nuisance. Watching him trudge off with his lantern, Hagrid looked at the 7 students before him and sighed. The Forbidden Forest was Hagrid's backyard, but it was far more dangerous to the children, and there were 7 of them. How could he possibly keep an eye on them all? Still, detention had to mean something. He couldn't fake it. In the end, he added himself and Fang to the group and split them into 2 parties. "You 3'll come with me," he said, pointing to Malfoy, Goyle, and Crabbe. "Harry, you 4 go with Fang. Fang's timid, but he knows the forest better'n anyone. If ye follow him, most of the creatures won't bother ye. Oh, and if ye see trouble, set off green fireworks. If you're in danger, red fireworks," Hagrid added. So they split up, torches and lanterns in hand, wands at the ready, and walked into the trees. The patrol was mostly for show. Hagrid wasn't about to lead them deep into the forest, just a loop along a familiar path. After a few minutes, Harry called softly, "Ted? Are you there?" Ted had resolved he wouldn't set foot in the forest that year. But this was different. If Lord Voldemort was anywhere near, they could be dead. He dared not count on plot armor. If he could ambush from shadow and buy time, it might be enough. Voldemort in his current state was fragile. Quirrell and the Philosopher's Stone might do the rest. Ted didn't want to make a fuss and risk bringing Dumbledore down on him or jeopardize plans he had, so he gritted his teeth. Borrowing Harry's invisibility cloak, Ted slipped it on and joined the others into the trees. He was far more nervous than the others. They feared the dark and wild beasts. Ted feared Voldemort. "I'm here. Don't make a sound. Just act like I'm not. Follow Fang. Don't run. Be ready to fight, like when we dueled," he whispered, then fell silent. No one knew quite where Ted was. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from different directions. He had used a phantom sound charm and surrounded himself with silencing magic, so his steps and breathing made no noise. He had taken a potion to hide his scent. He was ready for anything. Night in the Forbidden Forest was dim. The trees loomed, and even a bright moon was broken into shards by thick branches. It was only mid-May. In late summer, the canopy would be denser and the place nearly pitch black. The forest wasn't quiet. Bugs chirped nearby. Strange calls echoed from unknown distances. Wind rustled leaves and undergrowth. The 7 students huddled close. Malfoy, in particular, felt his knees shaking and wanted nothing more than to cling to Hagrid's coat. Hagrid's stride, long as ever, meant they had to hurry to keep up, and after 10 minutes nerves frayed and sweat stood on their brows. The forest was full of oddities. Vines bloomed with ghostly blue flowers that clung to trunks and grew 2 people high. Large beetles made noises like a warped urhu. Unknown birds, startled by the group, cried out with a hollow, otherworldly shriek and burst from the branches. Malfoy, Goyle, and Crabbe dropped flat in fright. Worse, they almost ran right into a strange creature wandering the night. It was about 5 feet tall, camouflaged in dark red scales, so it nearly vanished in the dim light. At 3 paces distance, both sides noticed each other. It looked something like a thin velociraptor, big head, beak-like mouth, a crest along the neck that could flare open like a membrane, small wings, a long tail, and 2 ostrich-like legs ending in 4 sharp claws. "Ah!" Malfoy squealed, hitting a pitch so high it might have been heard in the castle. Goyle and Crabbe panicked and bolted, tripping over tree roots as they fled. Hagrid grabbed them before they could disappear into the shadows. Getting lost after midnight would have been far worse. "Don't be nervous. It's quite safe. Could ye stop screaming?" Hagrid managed, though even his broad courage felt a little tested by Malfoy's hysterics. He calmed the 3 down and stood protectively before them like a mother hen. "This is a great strange bird. Ain't dangerous. Look." He reached out. The creature pecked him hard, but Hagrid only laughed and took it as the animal playing. Malfoy rolled his eyes inwardly. Safe, he thought. This thing looked like a cross between a dragon and an ostrich, all scales and talons. He was convinced it wanted to eat them. But despite appearances, the great strange bird was mostly curious, not predatory, and Hagrid was right. As peculiar as it seemed, it posed little real danger. Harry's group hadn't been free of surprises either. Fang, like an old shepherd dog, knew the paths and steered them clear of a number of odd sights, yet they still found something none of them had seen before. Ron, exhausted, leaned against what he thought was a rock. The rock moved. A massive head slid out, translucent and jade-like, patterned with strange ridges. The creature's mouth curled inward like a chrysanthemum. It had 2 pairs of large golden eyes with scattered pupils, and fleshy tentacles waved from its head. It was a giant snail, its shell nearly 2 meters high. It had been withdrawn and motionless, perfectly camouflaged. Not even Fang had noticed. Ron screamed "Mum!" and nearly scrambled up a tree. Harry and Neville pulled wands. Ted's voice cut the panic short. "Don't move. It's harmless." The voice floating over the clearing might have sounded familiar to Malfoy if he'd been there. "This looks like a terrestrial giant snail," Ted said quietly. "A magical creature that does little harm to people. The worst it usually does is crawl through vegetable gardens and ruin the crops. It doesn't normally go near human settlements. I've only seen pictures. Came here after the first celestial convergence. This is my first real one," he added. "Its slime makes roads very smooth. It's prized as a magical building material." Hearing it called an otherworldly creature made Jerry feel a strange kinship. Perhaps it came from a place like his hometown. The giant snail was indeed docile. Its golden eyes watched them a moment, then it withdrew, and the shell once again looked like a harmless rock. Natural camouflage at its finest. By the time their first night of patrol was over, Ted was exhausted. 2 hours of walking, keeping his spirit tight, every sense on alert. Led by Fang, they'd seen a few magical creatures, but no real danger. Even so, with another fortnight of patrols ahead of him, Ted felt a cold knot of dread. The forest had not been the only thing he had to worry about. Chapter 75, Professor Quirrell in Action. The next 2 nights were far from peaceful. Once, Harry and her friends encountered a redcap, an elemental creature so ugly it made goblins look handsome. Redcaps wore crude, blood-stained caps. They were malicious, bloodthirsty ambushers who haunted battlefield ruins and shadowy paths. If Ted hadn't been tailing them in the dark, no one would have noticed the redcaps stalking their group. Ted didn't wait for pleasantries. He fired an ice arrow straight through its chest. Red blood sprayed out as glittering red ice crystals. He gained 120 experience points and picked up an odd card showing a white light with a trailing flame. Elemental Spirit White, a material card, the innate spirituality of elemental creatures. Not bad, a level 4 monster yielding more experience than a troll, perhaps because it had been killed outright. On another night, Malfoy and his companions stumbled across a giant thistle demon tree, and Goyle nearly got hurt. This plant from another world normally looked like a harmless tree with flowers on top, but when it attacked, those flowers opened into huge tooth-filled maws. Vines and thorns whipped out, and its sap was corrosive. 3 inexperienced students almost became its dinner. Hagrid, however, knew these beasts. They usually stayed deep in the forbidden forest near the mountain, moving slowly at about 5 kilometers an hour. He grabbed one of the vine tentacles, tore it off, and pried Goyle free. Then, to protect the castle, Hagrid loaded his enormous crossbow and shot the thing into pieces. After that, Malfoy swore he'd never break school rules again, so long as detention didn't mean the Forbidden Forest. After a week like that, Ted had killed a few monsters and stacked up several hundred experience points, but he didn't relax. He had been trying to keep in touch with Hagrid because he suspected Professor Quirrell of secretive, dangerous activity. Hagrid's reports had slowed recently, so Ted kept urging him to stay vigilant. That afternoon, Hagrid finally sent news. A unicorn had been injured. Something with power had attacked it. "I must find it and heal it," Hagrid said. "And whatever did this, you lot must be careful." Ted's stomach sank. Quirrell and Lord Voldemort were acting. Quirrell had failed to get the Philosopher's Stone, and Voldemort's possession had been wearing him thin. In the past, animals Voldemort possessed almost died within a day or two. Even a skilled wizard like Quirrell couldn't keep drawing on that parasitic force for months. Voldemort's plans to return made unicorn blood dangerously important. Drinking it would help sustain him, despite the old curse that goes with it. Curses could be tools to a dark wizard. Quirrell, desperate and weakening, would not hesitate. Hagrid's tracking showed the unicorn was only a sub-adult. It had somehow escaped Quirrell once. That might have been deliberate on Quirrell's part, or a genuine slip, but Voldemort would not be fooled. If a unicorn died, it would be a major step toward Voldemort's recovery unless Dumbledore intervened. Dumbledore had long suspected Voldemort might not be entirely gone, but he had no definitive proof. He was patient and strategic. He would not act rashly until those two grim questions were answered. Why was Voldemort still around, and how could he be killed outright? Dumbledore's restraint came from experience. When he moved to finish matters. Until then, Quirrell remained a problem Dumbledore watched closely but did not yet confront. This was the last night of detention. Ted had persuaded Hagrid to keep patrols to the forest edge given the current danger. For 2 nights, the small group stayed shallow. No deep searches, no baiting hidden threats. Instead of unicorns or ancient evils, they found bowtruckles in the trees. Bowtruckles look like green stick insects, little branch-like creatures that defend trees. They usually do no harm unless provoked, and Ted won a few over with woodlice they liked. From an old guardian tree, he managed to obtain a long branch, the kind that made a sturdy walking stick. The patrol felt more like an outing than a punishment. Ron and Jerry produced hidden food and drinks and nearly started a bonfire to roast meat, while Ted sat under his invisibility cloak, fuming at their carelessness. A sharp noise broke the forest's hush. A red firework blasted into the sky. Everything went wrong in an instant. Ted's first thought was Hagrid. "Everyone, fall back to Hagrid's hut," he said, his voice muffled by the cloak. "Ansu, get a message to Professor McGonagall." Then Ted slipped into the trees, still unseen. His friends heard the urgency in his voice and felt the seriousness of his behavior. He had been tense for nights, using magic to disguise his voice, keeping away from them. They knew something had him worried. "What do we do?" Ron asked. "Stay ready," Harry called back. "Are you all prepared?" "Yes, ready," Ron answered without hesitation. Jerry and Neville nodded. "Let Ansu go get McGonagall. We'll follow and watch, but keep your distance. Be careful." So they moved as quietly as they could, torn between wanting to help Hagrid and obeying Ted's order not to rush in blindly. The forest closed around them, the moon silvering the leaves, and all of them felt the same chill. Quirrell was acting, Voldemort leaned on him, and the next few hours might decide everything. Chapter 76, Forbidden Forest Poacher. Ted raced toward the burst of red fireworks, casting greased soles on his feet as he ran. The spell made his soles glide like roller skates. With a slight push, he could slide a long distance across ordinary ground, effortless and fast. To pin down his target precisely, he used a biological positioning spell, a charm that locates a creature you are familiar with or have prepared for. In less than 5 minutes, he was in the area. From a distance, he heard a commotion, Malfoy shouting, Hagrid roaring, and the harsh crack of several strangers' spells hitting tree trunks. There were 3 or 4 of them. Professor Quirrell had actually found helpers? Impossible. Voldemort's pride and paranoia would make him unlikely to contact former followers in this state. So who was attacking Hagrid and company? Hagrid had been framed years ago for raising acromantulas and expelled. His wand had been snapped. Dumbledore's Elder Wand had later fixed it, and the umbrella Hagrid carried was really his wand disguised. But Hagrid was no spell prodigy. He'd never been more than competent. These other adults were using offensive magic Ted didn't recognize. It felt like dark arts. Hagrid, burdened with Malfoy and 2 others, was clearly outmatched. Yet the attackers barely pressed the fight. Most of their spells were suppressive, and they kept backing away. Ted crept closer under the invisibility cloak to eavesdrop. Their shouted orders were all the same. "Quick, retreat! They'll send others from the school!" Fear sounded through their voices. Ted slipped his wand out from under the cloak and whispered, "Stupefy." The man at the rear was taken by surprise and hit square in the chest. He must have had protections up. Stupefy didn't knock him out, only sent him sprawling, yelping and scrambling behind a thick tree. "Someone's behind me," he cried, pressing himself to the trunk. Ted's sneak attack hadn't gone as cleanly as he'd hoped. He shifted his position. Another attacker tried Revelio, but it had no effect. Potter family cloaks weren't so easily pierced. The next instant, a third man raised his wand and shouted, "Humanoid tracking!" Ted's stomach tightened. The spell didn't dispel invisibility, but it did sense humanoid presences. He'd felt that flicker of magic a heartbeat before. Its effective radius was only about 20 meters, and he'd backed away in time, so the caster only got a vague direction. Still, it was enough. Nobody was truly safe. Every magical defense had counters. The cloak hid faces and forms, but it didn't stop footprints, scent, or sound. Spells that targeted the person rather than sight could bypass it. The wizard who cast the tracking charm laughed and shouted, "Over there!" The four attackers decided they'd had enough. "No choice, retreat," one of them barked, and the rest apparated away in a blink. Ted barely had time to process the anticlimax. Who had they been? Hagrid gathered Malfoy and the two others and stamped toward the place they'd seen the commotion, snorting and swearing. "Who are you lot? Poachers," he bellowed. "Don't you dare leave." But the poachers had already gone. Hagrid knelt and examined the ground, scooping at a leaf and rubbing it with his thick finger. A faint, silvery liquid smeared across his nail. "Unicorn blood. It hasn't dried. They're hunting unicorns, blasted wretches. I won't let them get away." The giant's roar echoed like some great beast's, and Malfoy and the others shrank back. "You two, go back to the castle. I'm going after those poachers. Run!" Malfoy and the others bolted, scrambling through the trees. They hadn't been deep in the forest. If they kept their bearings, they could be out in 5 to 8 minutes. Hagrid grabbed his umbrella and a heavy crossbow and followed the trail of blood. Ted paused, cast several layers of protection over himself, and followed quietly at a distance. Elsewhere in the forest, Harry and her friends had entered too, but later, and not in a straight line. Forbidden forest paths never were. The red fireworks had faded and their direction had drifted. Ted's recent tutoring, magic practice, and 2 weeks of silent infiltration lessons had paid off. The group had learned to shield themselves and to mask scent and sound. Whether fate or luck, Harry, Neville, and their two companions stumbled upon the scene. A clearing opened under the moon. A unicorn lay in the grass, not yet dead but badly wounded, its whimpering barely audible. Moonlight poured over its white flank like a curtain. A figure in black knelt beside it, then hunched over and began to drink the unicorn's silvery blood. Harry's skin prickled, her scalp tingled, and her hair rose on end. The others were frozen. Ron had gone rigid. Jerry's legs threatened to give. Neville's throat tightened, and an S-shaped scar on his forehead burned as if on fire. But thanks to Ted's training, they held their fear in check and stayed silent. For a moment, the man at the unicorn's flank didn't notice them. Then someone behind him snapped. "Behind you, idiot! Someone's behind you!" The four Gryffindors' hearts leapt. They'd been discovered. But terror sharpened courage. "Stupefy!" Harry shouted, and a jet of red light lanced from her wand. 77. Treasure land full of gold. Expelliarmus! Neville's spell followed immediately. After training with Ted for so long, it was the most dependable offensive charm he knew. But the two scarlet spells slammed into a faint, wavering shield around the dark figure, clearly a shield charm. The man spun, rose to his feet, and raised a hand to cast. "Hey!" Ron's thrown object struck him. Puff, puff, puff. Yellow-green smoke billowed up in an instant. The man opened his mouth to speak the incantation, but the stench hit him so suddenly he nearly retched. "Run! We're no match for him." Neville shoved Jerry behind him and sprinted off, chucking things out of his pockets as he ran. The bundles were about the size of a baby's head, and as Jerry scattered them, several cabbage-like plants sprang forward. Neville's preparations, Heavenly Dynasty biting cabbage, oddly tasty, medicinal, and vicious when provoked. Professor Quirrell thrust out a hand and called a repelling charm, enemy repelling jinx, sending several of the biting cabbages flying away. He'd only taken a couple of steps when his foot struck something round. Sparks crackled under his shoe. Fireworks. Jerry's crackling fireworks and the dung bombs Ron had flung had been left behind by the fleeing students and were now going off underfoot. Ted, who had just noticed the commotion, fired off 3 red whistling fireworks in rapid succession. "Idiot! Don't chase! Go!" a voice hissed. Lord Voldemort's command cut through the din. Quirrell, as if granted sudden reprieve, apparated away. By the time Professor McGonagall and Snape reached the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid had already found the poachers, one of them dead. The three of them stood in silence, frowning, unsettled, and puzzled. The only certain conclusion was that students would no longer be allowed to patrol the Forbidden Forest. Less than half an hour later, Dumbledore had pieced together the sequence of events. Seen from one angle, it was bewildering, but the clues lined up. There had been two distinct groups of poachers. The first, the band Hagrid had run into, took any magical creature they could, diricals, mooncalves, and the like. The second was the mysterious dark figure. His skill was far higher. When he found the first group, he used the killing curse and killed one of them outright. The survivors fled, alerting Hagrid and bringing about the later confrontation. Facing superior force, the poachers abandoned much of their haul and slipped away. Meanwhile, Harry and the others had stumbled upon that same dark figure. His immediate quarry was unicorn blood. If he hadn't been distracted, drinking and off guard, he would probably have wiped them out. The one fortunate thing was that McGonagall and Snape had arrived in time to rescue the dying unicorn. Ted, who had returned to the castle and was lying down, received the notification from the system. Ding! Save the unicorn. Blue. Completed. Reward. 300 experience. Card. Holiness. Material card. A sacred radiance, far from filth and corruption, inspiring reverence. Ted had no idea what the material card was for, but he was sure it wasn't something that could sensibly combine with troll. Holy troll? The name alone sounded absurd. He hadn't expected Quirrell to run into poachers in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid explained more later. There had always been smugglers in the world, but the Forbidden Forest wasn't usually their target, until the Celestial Star conjunction. The changes it brought made many of the forest's creatures incredibly valuable on the black market. For wizards operating in the gray areas or outright dark practitioners, the forest had become a treasure trove. The intelligent species pulled in from other worlds weren't all friendly. Some, pushed by hardship, turned to crime. When the profits were high enough, nobody cared about Hogwarts' rules. If Hogwarts and Dumbledore hadn't stood guard, the place would already have been in chaos. Hagrid confided another story. The previous year, Ted's first year at school, there had been a smuggling incident in Hogsmeade. An American smuggler had tried to move a half-grown leopard cat, a dangerous creature rated XXXXX, on par with dragons and basilisks. It was not only a fierce predator, but naturally adept at legilimency, reading and ambushing its prey. The beast escaped in Hogsmeade, caused havoc, and was only recaptured by then Care of Magical Creatures Professor Kettleburn and Hagrid. It was now kept deep in the Forbidden Forest. Rumor had it Charlie Weasley had been involved. Poaching in the forest had been increasing. The gamekeeper's job had gotten much harder. Ordinary smugglers wouldn't dream of coming so deep into the forest. The risks were too high. One leopard cat, or a couple of trolls, and escape would be impossible. Apparition wasn't a skill everyone had. The men who did come were desperate and dangerous. Those desperate criminals ran straight into Voldemort, and many met their end. That night's detention had been a close call. Both Malfoy's lot and Harry's group had come away shaken. The image of spells snapping against tree trunks, the sight of a shadow drinking unicorn blood, and the poacher cut down by Avada Kedavra left its mark. For the next days, everyone behaved. Final exams were only a fortnight away. Exams were professors' greatest weapon. Scores were students' lifelines. After the Forbidden Forest incident, the staff treated the students like a force to be contained. No more sneaking into the forest, and even wandering the castle earned a reprimand. Unspokenly, the professors also loaded on homework that would chew up 2 or 3 hours of evening time, keeping students from mischief. Ted became even more low-key. He stopped volunteering in class and avoided contact with Professor Quirrell outside of lessons. Quirrell had become a cornered, dangerous animal. Better not to get involved. Yet one afternoon, while Harry was wandering under her invisibility cloak, she heard Quirrell sobbing around the corner, as if someone were threatening him. No, I can't do this anymore, please. All right, I'll do it. I understand. Harry said. The crying sounded pitiful and crushed. Ron and Jerry instantly guessed it must be Snape. In the whole castle, only Snape would pick on the timid Quirrell. Ron wondered if Snape might be extorting Quirrell's wages. Ted, on the other hand, had a darker thought that Voldemort might be forcing Quirrell to find the Philosopher's Stone. Revision week for finals arrived and the school turned tense. The library filled with last-minute crammers. Even Ron and Jerry looked worried. Time raced on, and June came round. Ding! Talent, otherworld knowledge, triggered, discovered. Traveler's delicious recipes, green. Traveler's delicious recipes records delicious recipes collected by a traveler in Kalimdor. Exchange cost, 180 experience. Huh, there's even something like this? Ted muttered. Knowledge could be recipes, too. He exchanged the card, and a rush of information poured into his mind. The book contained Azerothian recipes, food that restored stamina and sometimes granted special effects. There were 8 recipes: delicious wind serpent, delicious omelet, Redridge stew, hot wolf ribs, nightfin soup, grilled squid, spider sausage, mint lemonade. Food and drink, always useful. Ted frowned. His collection hadn't grown at all these past few days. What was he going to do? He'd hoped to hit it big, turn out to be a real score, but that chance had fizzled. 78. Final exam. Although Ted had acquired a very magical cooking recipe, he didn't have time to test it in the kitchen. Final exams had started this week. He arrived in the usual classroom with pen and parchment, followed by a determined Hermione ready for anything, Harry looking around for mischief, and a nervous Ron, Jerry, and Neville. Ron and Jerry were the sort who normally slacked off, avoiding work when possible and cheating when they could, getting by rather than excelling. They were above average in practical spell work, but their theoretical knowledge lagged, making them academic underachievers, except in a few subjects. Neville, meanwhile, worked hard and tried to do his homework, but his returns were small. Herbology and defense against the dark arts were decent, but he lacked confidence in many other areas. Ever since he'd read Ted's little story, Braveheart, Neville had gained courage and managed to overcome obstacles he once wouldn't have dared face. But courage isn't the same as knowledge, and confidence doesn't build in a day. In the examination hall, the air felt thick. Students' breathing slowed almost unconsciously. The first exam was Transfiguration, taught by the notoriously stern Professor McGonagall. Ding! Quest triggered. Final exam. This is your first final exam at Hogwarts, an assessment of your learning throughout the school year. Give it your all. Don't let your youth be wasted. Objective: achieve excellent grades in all subjects. Reward: 350 experience, random card. You are now the recognized top student in your year. It would be embarrassing if your grades were poor. Ted chuckled inwardly. I knew it. How could the system not pop up for something like this? System. Better late than never. All excellent grades. How hard could that be? The Transfiguration exam was in 2 parts. First came a written paper, explain the basic principles and taboos of Transfiguration, and offer personal insights. Ted filled 2 sheets of parchment, Hermione 3. Ron watched them scribbling furiously, then glanced at his own paper, where his oversized handwriting still failed to fill a single sheet. His stomach sank. Half an hour later, McGonagall told them to put down their quills. The practical portion followed. The task was simple to state: turn a mouse into a snuff box. First years had spent the year learning only 2 kinds of transfiguration: object to object and living creature to object, but success wasn't guaranteed. Most could turn a match into a needle by now. Turning a mouse into a proper snuff box was another matter. Ted had found the transformation especially tricky when he first encountered it. He'd spent hours training and searching for the right subtleties. McGonagall's face as she watched the students was stormy enough to show how trying the class had been. Ron's snuff box still had whiskers. Neville's one retained a tail. Jerry's effort was unique. It had 4 little legs and had already scurried away, with her sprawled on the floor chasing it. Seamus, true to form, sent his mouse flying, smoking, onto the ceiling, partly singed. Jerry couldn't help but wail theatrically. Oh, my little mouse, I feel your pain. Most students found Transfiguration a headache. Only 6 completed their transformations at all. Ted and Hermione did theirs not only completely but beautifully. Their snuff boxes bore delicate gold lines and embossed decorations like tiny works of art. McGonagall, who had been worn thin by clumsy attempts all morning, finally smiled. It was the satisfied smile of a farmer at harvest. proof her teaching had borne fruit. "Very good. Excellent. Well done," she praised, out of character but sincere. Transfiguration didn't usually produce two exceptional talents in one year, and she made sure they knew how rare it was. Lunchtime was subdued. The underclassmen's defeat hung in the air while the sophomores, juniors, and seniors wore expressions of amused schadenfreude. This might have been their favorite day of the year. Afternoon brought a worse dread, Snape's potions exam. The dungeon classroom felt colder and heavier, as if all warmth had been drained from it. Snape stood behind the podium like a black statue, brazier light throwing half his face into shadows and making him look like a looming threat. He crossed his arms and held his wand as if ready to strike any cheater. Crossing the threshold into his domain felt like stepping into an enchantment. Students' hearts dropped and bright thoughts vanished. Snape resembled a human dementor. He tapped the blackboard and the question appeared. Brew a forgetfulness potion. Time, 60 minutes. Neville's heart fell. The forgetfulness potion was one of the most advanced they'd attempted all year. Every step from ingredient preparation to magical infusion had taboos. One mistake could ruin the entire batch. There were no lesser results. Snape was clearly testing them to their limits. At the same time, a collective, small relief spread through the group. Ted had predicted Snape's move and had used the forgetfulness potion as a practice question, so the pressure dropped by half. Snape was always the inscrutable sort, unpredictable and hawkish, like a double agent who had played both sides, a master legilimens, and lethal in his attention to micro-expressions. He'd been watching Harry's face closely. He'd noticed Harry's slight smile when the question appeared. Snape thought to himself, did Harry inherit Lily's talent for potions? He performs well, but isn't consistent enough. Brewing a forgetfulness potion was still complicated. Even the first steps, distilling pure water and preparing valerian, kept them busy. The 60-minute limit was generous only if everything went smoothly. A single slip left no time to start over. The correct procedure was exacting. Distill pure water. Using a pure silver knife, cut valerian into pieces 3 to 4 centimeters long. Add the valerian to the distilled water and heat for 20 seconds. Stir 3 times clockwise. Add 2 parts crushed filtered mistletoe berry juice and stir 5 times counterclockwise. Boil for 5 minutes. Wave the wand to infuse the magic. Continue boiling for another 5 minutes. Repeat the wave and boil cycle 3 times, then let the potion cool. If everything went perfectly, a potion could be ready in about 45 minutes. Clumsy but careful work might take the full hour. Make a mistake, and Snape wouldn't let you squander his ingredients. Ted and Hermione finished their potions in around 40 minutes. Hermione was 2 minutes faster, her talent for potions clearly showing. Snape only glanced at them, snorted, and moved on. He prowled through the room, applying pressure where students wavered and keeping a sharp eye on Harry's cauldron. To his annoyance, Neville had steadied. His hands trembled and sweat beaded on his brow, but he acted as if Snape wasn't there, focused on the brewing with no mistakes yet. When the hour ended and the students filed out of the dungeon, it felt like being released from Azkaban. The air was suddenly brighter. Everyone took deep breaths and relaxed. Snape looked like he was going to shove his hooked nose into Harry's cauldron, Ron grumbled. He told me mine smelled like a troll could drink it. Jerry protested indignantly. His mistletoe berries hadn't been ground fine enough or filtered properly. The scent was overpowering. Fortunately, the potion still worked well enough to pass. They left the dungeons tired but relieved, each carrying the small, private victory of having survived another set of finals. 79. Magic-patterned amethyst. The next day's exam was Charms, held in the 4th floor classroom. Professor Flitwick's test was refreshingly relaxed. Many students even found reasons to smile. The prompt was delightfully whimsical. Make a pineapple tap dance across a desk. Most students managed it easily, Neville included, and Hermione turned her pineapple into a fierce athletic performer, even throwing in a few muggle gymnastics moves that earned applause from Flitwick and the class. When it was Ted's turn, he went further. He made the pineapple sprout hands and feet, animated like a stick figure, and launched into an enthusiastic. It was clear. He'd borrowed choreography from videos he'd seen online. He even flicked his wand to supply a bit of musical accompaniment. At one point, he dressed the pineapple in Pinru's stage costume and had it dance with a provocative flair. Lucky for him, Flitwick only laughed and warned, "Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Ahem, not allowed next time, though." Herbology was next, in the greenhouses, and the exam was picking and processing dittany. Dittany is an excellent healing herb. Many magical creatures use it, and wizards have developed 7 or 8 potions and applications from it. The most typical is white essence, prized for its stability and long-lasting effect. Herbology is considered a core subject because it's complex and indispensable. Wizards simply can't do without it. Many students earn top marks, mostly from Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw had 3 high scorers, Ted, Hermione, and one of Ted's roommates, Michael Corner. From Gryffindor, only Neville managed an excellent grade. Sadly, herbology doesn't appeal to many little lions. Professor Quirrell's defense against the dark arts exam was purely theoretical, all written, no practical. The paper covered methods of treating werewolf bites. In the magical world, vampires and werewolves are both real, but the two are treated very differently. Vampires tend to keep a low profile. They live long, see much, and generally keep to themselves. They didn't flock to Grindelwald's side in large numbers, so relations with wizards are relatively stable. Werewolves, however, face explicit restrictions and heavy discrimination. Unlike many demi-human beings, werewolves can't reliably control themselves. A bite can be contagious, and on the night of the full moon they transform, becoming wildly dangerous and unrecognizable. That contagious, uncontrollable aspect makes them feared and reviled, and the more society shuns them, the worse their lives become, a vicious cycle. Some extremist werewolves, desperate and angry, have even attacked wizard and muggle children after transforming, which only deepens the hatred. First years are therefore taught how to prevent and treat bites. A bite from a non-transformed werewolf usually doesn't produce full lycanthropy. It might cause minor symptoms like extra body hair, stronger cravings for meat, or irritability. A bite from a transformed werewolf is far more likely to infect, though prompt treatment can sometimes prevent full transformation. Once someone has transformed even once, though, the prognosis is bleak. They'll likely spend every full moon locked away for life. Quirrell's lectures were dry and by the book, but the exam itself was not hard. Any student who read the textbook carefully could pass. Ted even added a few extra preventative techniques to his answers. Astronomy's test was held at midnight on the astronomy tower. Ted had a rough time with that course. The second-hand telescope he'd been given was awkward to use, and he ended up borrowing his friend's scopes for study. The exam required drawing a map of Jupiter. Doable, but Ted was already hoping he could drop astronomy in third year. It felt like wasted time. The final paper was History of Magic. History should teach lessons, help people analyze causes and effects, but under Professor Binns's soporific drone, even memorizing the textbook was a struggle. The exam resembled a Muggle exam. Essay questions, fill in the blanks, and multiple choice. What happened when, and what its significance was. One question even asked which eccentric wizard invented the self-stirring cauldron. The answer was Gaspard Shingleton. Ted couldn't help feeling the question trivialized history. Did the self-stirring cauldron really alter the course of civilization? Binns, it seemed, would continue coasting forever. After 4 straight days of exams, Ted exhaled in relief. The intensity had felt like a rehearsal for adult life, stressful, exhausting, and oddly rite of passage. The older students who had survived it before looked on with amused nostalgia. Now Ted understood their mixture of sympathy and glee. When results came in, Ted had done extremely well. He'd earned excellent marks across the board and ranked first in his year. Back in the common room, he leaned back on the sofa with his eyes closed, but his mind was occupied with the rewards that had appeared. 350 experience points for the blue tier quest, and 3 cards that flipped open in his head. The first card showed a beautiful quill that shimmered faintly gold as it wrote. Item card. It consumed a large amount of magic and could answer yes or no questions on paper. Cooldown, 10 hours. Note, the quill cannot answer overly complex or confidential questions. Ted frowned at that limitation. Overly complex sounded vague. Given it was only a blue quality card, it probably wasn't worth much, not as useful as asking a Ouija board in his opinion. The second card was a fist-sized amethyst with dark red patterns and natural facets that caught the light. Magic patterned amethyst. Material card. A magic-filled amethyst represents spirituality and spirit. It can develop wisdom, aid thinking, enhance telekinetic focus, and improve memory. An amethyst that forms naturally with magic patterns in a special environment is an extremely rare treasure. Ted's heart quickened when he read that. As a mind mage, he had the ability to enlighten a spirit crystal servant, but he'd been delaying because he hadn't found a suitable crystal. That delay had been dragging on for almost a year. If ever there were a perfect material, this was it. Decision made, this amethyst was his. The third card pictured a red candy. Above it swirled a misty white figure, a wrathful deity holding a sword in one hand and making a mudra with the other. Item card. A confection made by the Senpu Temple that grants the Humjang's protection effect. After consumption, the protection of a non-human spirit descends upon you, boosting physical and mental attributes for 3 minutes. Uses 3 thirsts. Note, spirit possession is hard on the human body. You must bite the candy and grit your teeth to endure. Spirit possession sounded risky, and although the boost was tempting, Ted preferred not to gamble with his mind and body. In the end, the amethyst was the obvious choice. Magic-patterned amethyst blue would finally let him proceed with the project he'd been postponing. Thanks to reader Sunset and Dusk for the 300 reward. Thanks to reader Chubby Mountain Lord who ate his fill for the 100 reward. 80. Director Dumbledore's breakthrough game. The exams were over and a weight seemed to lift from everyone's shoulders. For the next few days they could relax and wait for the holidays. But after lunch, Hermione noticed Neville looked pale and drawn. "Neville, did you get enough rest?" she asked. Neville forced a smile. "I'm all right. Just had a nightmare." Jerry leaned in. "He's been having them for nights. I told him to go to the hospital wing and ask Madame Pomfrey for a dreamless sleep potion, but he wouldn't. He didn't want to worry you lot." Ron chimed in. "Sounds like exam nerves to me. George and the others were talking about it. Lots of students get them. It usually gets better once the exams are over." Neville nodded. "Yeah, I was worried about my grades. Now the exams are done, I guess the nightmares will stop." What no one knew was that Ted had been wrestling with a much bigger decision for days, whether to get involved in the Philosopher's Stone affair. If he stepped in, it could be dangerous. The whole wizarding world was changing, and Neville had suddenly become central. Quirrell and you-know-who's lethality were unknowns, and even what traps the professors might set was unclear. Ted's current abilities made rash interference risky. Still, Dumbledore always seemed to have a plan. In the original story, if Harry hadn't gone to the Mirror of Erised, Quirrell might never have learned what the Philosopher's Stone looked like. But Dumbledore was clearly orchestrating much of this, even laying out the props. Dumbledore's aim was to train his savior so the child could confront Voldemort later. Could Dumbledore allow Neville to be left out? Probably not. The students would likely be led to whatever head-on confrontation was intended, and with Dumbledore's guidance, they wouldn't simply be left to die. The Philosopher's Stone was the only one of its kind in the world. Being involved was an unmatched opportunity, high risk, but huge reward. And with Neville suddenly mentioning nightmares and scar pain, Ted felt his last hesitation vanish. Do it, he decided. Rather than waiting to be shepherded into whatever Dumbledore had planned, it was better to take the initiative and keep the headmaster behind the scenes. With Dumbledore covertly supporting them, failing to seize the chance would be a shame. Neville probably couldn't avoid it, and Harry, Ron, and the others would follow. Should he and Hermione stay out? If they did, Neville and the others might never even catch a glimpse of what Voldemort had become without Dumbledore's subtle push. Ted's face grew serious as he looked at Neville. Ron felt his heart race. Jerry shivered inwardly. The last time Ted wore that expression was before the Mirror of Erised mess, and nobody wanted a repeat of that winter. Ted took a breath. "Neville, has your scar been acting up?" Neville startled, then answered anxiously. "It hurts sometimes. Lately, in the middle of the night, when I wake from the nightmares, my scar starts throbbing and wakes me up." Ron slapped the back of Neville's head in panic. "Why didn't you tell us?" Neville scratched his neck. I didn't want you to worry. The S-shaped scar, the mark they all associated with the defeat of you-know-who, combined with recurring nightmares, was worrying. Ted asked, "What are you dreaming about?" Ron, a beat slow to follow, immediately assumed it was Snape. Neville said, "I dream about that night, about you-know-who drinking unicorn blood." His face went pale. To dream about that and have the scar wake you in pain wasn't something anyone wanted to endure. The six friends exchanged looks. Ted in particular was grave. He took out his wand, twirled it twice between his fingers, and cast a muffling charm so the corridor couldn't overhear them. "You all know I've always been wary of the Forbidden Forest. I've confirmed there's a very dangerous dark wizard out there who's been hunting unicorns. Unicorn blood is immensely powerful. It can keep someone alive even when they're nearly dead, but at the cost of a terrible curse afterward. It's such a dark, desperate act that you'd think even most dark wizards wouldn't go that far." Harry's voice was tight. "So who was the person that night? Who would do that?" Ted lowered his voice further. "I suspect it was you-know-who." "Who?" Ron's voice shot up into a squeal. His eyes went wide. Ted remained calm. "I think the one who drank unicorn blood was you-know-who." "You-know-who?" Harry's eyes widened. Even the Gryffindor strongwoman, the Hogwarts boxing champion, felt that cold, familiar terror. Voldemort had been the horror story name their parents used to make them behave. To some, he was the one who had killed their parents. For Neville, this was particularly personal. "There have always been rumors that you-know-who wasn't completely gone," Ted went on. "We know Dumbledore has hidden the only Philosopher's Stone in the third-floor chambers. We know someone found a way past Fluffy, Hagrid's three-headed dog, and we know someone has been hunting unicorns." Neville's face flushed. His grip tightened on the wand made of his father's unicorn hair. "He's coming back. We have to stop him." Harry reacted the same way, a sharp, determined surge. Hermione grabbed Harry's arm. "We have to tell Dumbledore. Now," Ron blurted, "but we don't know the password to his office." There was always the matter of the password for the headmaster's office. "Let's go find Professor McGonagall," Jerry suggested. They hurried to Professor McGonagall's office and burst in. "Professor, we need to see the headmaster. It's urgent," Harry said, pressing for an answer. McGonagall adjusted her spectacles and looked at the six of them, so often her most troublesome and brightest pupils. "The headmaster is extremely busy. He cannot drop everything for every alarm." Neville opened his mouth, but Ron clamped a hand over it. McGonagall hesitated, then added, "Besides, he isn't in the castle at the moment." "Not in the castle?" "No. The ministry asked for his assistance. He left right after lunch." "When will he be back?" Jerry asked. "I don't know." They left McGonagall's office, disappointment written all over their faces. At the moment when they needed him most, Dumbledore was away. "What do we do?" Ron asked. "Wait for him to return?" Jerry offered. "No," Neville snapped. "We can't let you-know-who get the stone. We have to stop him. We have to get it first." He looked around for support. Harry nodded immediately. She couldn't let the enemy have it. Ron nodded too. He hadn't quite grasped how dangerous it was, but he was behind them. Ted agreed. "We have to act." Hermione looked at Ted as though to make sure he was committed. "I'm coming with you. I won't let you do anything foolish." "Don't leave me behind," Jerry said, eager as ever. They decided to meet at 11 that night outside the left side classroom on the third floor. At that moment, a soft chime sounded like a game notification. Ding! Task triggered. Dungeon crawl. A growth-oriented dungeon crawl specially set up at Hogwarts by Dumbledore for the Savior and friends. Objective: complete 7 challenges. Reward: 300 EXP, random card. Director Dumbledore has written the script, set up the props and the studio, and invited famous actors to play the villains. All that's missing is you. Ding! Task triggered. Can I touch your Philosopher's Stone? Nicholas Flamel's greatest alchemical creation, the only one in the wizarding world, the legendary Philosopher's Stone. Objective: touch the Philosopher's Stone. Reward: 1200 EXP, plus 1 alchemy level, card Pseudo-Philosopher's Stone read. If you miss this chance, you won't get another. 2 tasks, 1 blue, 1 red. This was shaping up to be a hugely profitable adventure. But how could they actually get close enough to touch the Philosopher's Stone? Could Dumbledore have set this whole thing in motion?